Chapter 443. One day later, without Shi Wanya knowing, the Empress brought Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan to Longzhou City. With the Empress's skills, she naturally wouldn't be discovered if she wanted to avoid other people. It is said that this is a dragon vein that runs through the entire Tianjing Basin. The mouth of the dragon faces north, so it is said that Tianjing Basin can conquer the world, the Empress said as she looked at Longzhou City, which was not far away. Of course, she didn't believe in such things. Conquer the world. Who dares to touch my world? A group of people who were locked up here were still delusional. The Empress was still dressed in red, and Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were dressed in green. The three of them standing on the road were extremely eye-catching. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan carried a small bag on their backs that contained many important things, such as the Empress's ergotu. There was also a change of clothes. The three of them arrived at the city gate and saw a long queue in front of them. Go and ask what's going on, the Empress said. Qing Yuan went forward for a while and returned. Your mistress, what is the entrance fee? The Empress frowned. Tianjing Basin was under her rule, so why didn't she know about the entrance fee? After thinking for a while, she didn't think too much about it. This would naturally be rectified in the future. Did you bring money? Qing Yuan, Hong Wuan, the two of them were at a loss. They had prepared a lot of things before coming, but they only thought about what the Empress needed. They were afraid that the Empress wouldn't like the food, so they packed some spices and forgot about the most important thing, money. After all, there was no place in the palace where money was needed. Money was something that was too distant for them. Your mistress, please forgive us. We forgot about the money. Shall we go back first? We will come back tomorrow after we withdraw the money, the two of them whispered nervously. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She never thought about these things when she went out with Renbaqian. If she didn't see the entrance fee at the city gate, she wouldn't even remember to use money. What would Renbaqian do if he encountered such a situation? The Empress recalled Renbaqian's style and then relaxed her frown. Forget it, let's use another method. What method? Let's think of a way to enter the city first, then find a rich man and rob him. The Empress believed that if Renbaqian was here, he would definitely use this method. Ah! Both of them were stunned. Young miss, Her Majesty is going to rob money. If others knew about this, the two of them would definitely be cursed to death. That's settled then. Let's go to another place to enter the city. The Empress gestured for the two of them to pass through the fields near the city and find a remote place. Carrying one of them in each hand, they crossed a few hundred meters in a few seconds, crossed the city wall, and landed in the city. The Empress moved so quickly that the patrolling soldiers on the city wall didn't notice her at all. The three of them entered the city, passed through the alleys, and blended into the crowd. They looked around with great interest. Everything was new to them. The Empress was still fine, but Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were elated. Their attention had long been attracted by their surroundings, and they had completely forgotten that Her Majesty was preparing to rob them. However, even among the crowd, the three of them were extremely eye-catching. On one hand, it was because of their appearances, especially the Empress. On the other hand, it was because of their attire, especially the Empress. The Empress's bright red attire, coupled with her appearance, made it impossible for people not to notice her. The three of them were looking around, and the people around them were looking at them. The Empress quickly discovered this situation, but she didn't care. She didn't need to care about other people's opinions. In fact, there were many men who wanted to strike up a conversation. There were many merchants in Longzhou City, and there were also many rich people. Naturally, there were many people who had a stomach full of thoughts. However, the Empress's aura was too strong, and many people began to feel guilty after looking at her. As a result, the three of them actually didn't encounter any trouble. Young miss, the men are also wearing skirts, "Young miss, look, that's a bone grinder. There are even bone knives there." "I have never seen such a thing before." Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were both excited. The Empress looked around while thinking about how to find Renbaqian. That guy shouldn't be in Longzhou City now, right? She didn't know where he had gone. The Empress felt that it was very important to find Renbaqian. Otherwise, there would only be two idiots by her side who knew nothing. With that guy around, at least she wouldn't have to think about robbing people. However, Tianjing Basin wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. There were more than 10 million people here, and it was really too difficult to find someone without a clue. The three of them walked around the city for half a day. After the initial novelty had passed, Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan finally quietened down. The most important thing was that the two of them were starting to get hungry. The three of them had only eaten in the morning, and it was almost evening now. However, they didn't even bring any money with them, and they were too ashamed to tell the Empress that they were already hungry. The Empress heard their stomachs rumbling, but wasn't moved. After walking around the city for half a round, she had a rough idea. Generally speaking, the bigger the courtyard, the richer it was. After looking around for a long time, there was one courtyard that was the largest. It was located in the northern part of Longzhou City, and there weren't any buildings around it. This courtyard was the only one that occupied an area of more than 10 acres. There were 2 stone sculptures of a saber-toothed tiger at the entrance, and there were also a few guards there. If she guessed correctly, this was probably the residence of the warlord of Longzhou City. After guessing that it was the residence of the warlord, the Empress confirmed her target. With her status, she naturally wouldn't rob an ordinary person. The warlord of Longzhou City was a good target. The Empress didn't wait until nightfall. After walking around with the two of them, she headed straight for the residence of the warlord. There were a few guards at the entrance of the residence. When they saw a lady dressed in red walking toward the residence with 2 ladies dressed in green, their eyes lit up. Judging by their age, could it be that the warlord is looking for a love debt that he incurred outside? The guards secretly guessed and went forward to stop the 3 of them. "This is the residence of the warlord. If there's nothing else, please leave immediately." Although the lady dressed in red had an extraordinary aura, the gate of the Prime Minister was a rank 7 official. As the guards of the warlord's residence, they didn't mind seeing all kinds of extraordinary people. "Ask the warlord to come out and see me." "Forget it, I'll look for him myself," the Empress said faintly without even looking at them. "Presumptuous. Who are you?" The 4 guards were furious when they heard what the lady in red said. However, just as her hand reached for the hilt of her saber, the Empress's figure flashed. Then, she walked in as if nothing had happened. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan looked at each other and hurriedly followed. When the 3 of them entered the courtyard, the guards at the entrance swayed and fell to the ground one after another. After the 3 of them entered the courtyard, no one stopped them. Although the 3 of them walked around the residence without anyone leading them, others didn't know where they came from. Especially since they were 3 young ladies, they thought that they were the warlord's guests. After all, in Longzhou City, there had never been a case of someone knocking down a guard and barging in like this. Furthermore, the 3 of them were too indifferent and walked leisurely as if they were in their own home. In fact, Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were a little nervous. However, at the same time, they were a little excited. Robbery was something they had only heard about in stories. They didn't expect to be able to do it themselves. "Where's the warlord?" The Empress walked through 2 courtyards, grabbed a servant from the side, and asked. "Sir is in the guest hall." The servant answered subconsciously when he heard the Empress's cold voice. "Lead the way." "Yes." The servant thought to himself. He didn't know where this big shot came from, but he was actually more dignified than the warlord. When the Empress followed the servant inside, someone finally discovered that the guard outside had been knocked out, and the front courtyard immediately became noisy. Then, someone thought of the three ladies they had just seen and sent someone inside to report while searching the residence. At this time, the Empress had already arrived at the courtyard where the guest hall was located. She saw a room in front of her with 4 doors open, and she could see a few people sitting in the room talking. There were 2 men sitting at the top, and 3 people sitting at the bottom of the table. "Warlord Sun, I heard that someone from the Yun Nation is here," a man at the top asked. "Mr. Fong, you are quite well informed," a man in his 50s with a long beard replied with a smile on his face. In fact, he had just received this news. He knew that someone from the Yun Nation was passing through Longzhou City, but he didn't know about it. This made him feel that his subordinates were useless. "Warlord Sun, do you know anything about their purpose?" the man called Mr. Fong asked. Warlord Sun stroked his long beard. He couldn't possibly say that he hadn't seen them before, right? He only found out about such a person passing through 10 days after they left. As a warlord, he was afraid that he would be looked down upon if he didn't even know that someone like that had passed through his own city. Following which, he raised his head and saw a lady in red leading 2 ladies in green toward him under the guidance of a servant. He immediately frowned. Who was this person? Why didn't anyone inform him? When the Empress walked into the room, everyone looked at her with amazement in their eyes. The Empress was silent for a moment. She thought about the excuse she had prepared and felt that there shouldn't be any problem. She said coldly, "Robbery. Hand over the money." Everyone was immediately petrified. Chapter 444. City Lord Sun was so angry that he almost laughed after recovering from his shock. Robbing the City Lord Manor. If it wasn't for the fact that the person in front of him didn't seem to be delirious, he would have suspected that the other party was suffering from hysteria. "How should I address you? If you lack travel expenses, as long as you ask, I can still give you a sum of money. There's no need to joke like this." City Lord Sun's voice was rather calm. After all, he had seen all sorts of things and wouldn't get angry easily. "Rob, take the money, or die." The Empress was unmoved. She didn't have a good impression of these remnant citizens of the Han Nation. On the contrary, she loathed them. If it weren't for the original agreement, she would have killed all of them long ago. At this moment, he was only taking money and sparing his life. This was already a great gift from him. Hearing this, City Lord Sun's expression immediately turned ugly. He had already spoken politely. Could it be that the other party thought that he, the City Lord of Longzhou City, was easy to bully? Where did this madman come from to spout nonsense here? Before Lord Sun could speak, the person next to him couldn't stand it. The Empress's body swayed. "Paw!" The person who spoke immediately spurted out blood from his 7 orifices and collapsed to the ground. No one had expected that she would make a move just like that. The sudden turn of events shocked everyone once again. One by one, they stood up from their chairs in anger and wanted to pull out their weapons. Spirit will experts. Everyone, stop. However, Warlord Sun instantly realized the other party's strength. The other party's speed was so fast that he couldn't react in time. There was no other possibility that the other party was a spirit will expert. As soon as he said that, everyone felt as if they had been hit by a paralysis spell. Beads of sweat flowed down their foreheads. How could it be a spirit will expert? Was this woman a spirit will expert? "Senior." City Lord Sun rose to his feet and said hoarsely, "I don't know what Senior wants, but I'll do my best." At the end of the day, he still didn't quite believe that a spirit will expert would rob him. What was the status of a spirit will expert? In the entire Tianjin Basin with a population of more than 10 million, there were only 13 famous spirit will experts. This was because the lifespan of a spirit will expert far exceeded that of an ordinary person. A spirit will expert would be treated like an ancestor no matter where he went. Why was there a need to commit robbery? Goldie. The Empress didn't know what Rinpochen was thinking. Her goal was very clear. Youth, send someone to move all the gold from the vault here. City Lord Sun didn't expect that the other party would really only want money. However, he reacted quickly and immediately said to the servant who was paralyzed on the side. Ever since the Empress came in and said the first sentence, the servant was paralyzed. At this moment, upon hearing the order, he hurriedly got up and ran outside. The Empress wasn't afraid that they would play any tricks. It was just a matter of giving them another slap. These people wouldn't be able to create any trouble in front of her. Senior, please wait a moment. City Lord Sun cupped his hands. The Empress ignored him, and the room became quiet. Everyone kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to say a word for fear of angering the lady in front of them. It was obvious that this person was not a good-tempered person. City Lord, someone has broken into the mansion. Castellan Sun looked at the guard who rushed in to report the news, and expressionlessly waved his hand to chase him away. Let's go. Inform everyone to do what they are supposed to do. The intruder is a senior. Everyone waited for the time it took for an incense stick to burn before heavy footsteps could be heard from outside. A few people carried 4 boxes into the living room and placed them on the floor. City Lord Sun took a few steps forward and opened the boxes. 3 of the boxes were filled with gold ingots, and the last box was filled with all kinds of gold and silver ornaments. Senior, they are all here. Then, he obediently stood to one side and said, Senior, they are all here. The Empress tilted her head, and Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan immediately went forward to open the bag. They picked up some gold ingots from the box and placed them inside. Then, they looked at the gold ornaments. The ornaments were exquisitely made, and some were even inlaid with gems. Compared to the gold ingots, they were even more tempting. One of them packed a lot of ornaments until the bag was bulging. Only then did he stop. The Empress took a deep look at City Lord Sun. If this person's answer had been slightly off, she would have killed him with a slap. She didn't expect this person to be so quick-witted and let him escape with his life. This look made City Lord Sun break out in a cold sweat, but he still didn't dare to move. The Empress didn't say a word, turned around, and went out. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan hurriedly followed her, and their backpacks jingled as they walked. Phew! After the Empress left the courtyard, everyone heaved a sigh of relief and slumped into their chairs. This person is dressed in red, and she looks so young. Could she be? One of them was halfway through his sentence when everyone's expression changed drastically, and they hurriedly covered his mouth. Even if you want to die, don't drag us down with you, someone beside him scolded in a low voice. With this kind of appearance, this age, and this kind of dressing, not only had he guessed her identity, but everyone else had also guessed it. However, no one dared to say it. If they said it and that person heard it, they were afraid that no one here would be able to survive. That person shouldn't be here at all. If the news of her appearance were to spread, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. The entire Tianjing basin would move upon hearing the news. Even though everyone didn't know why, that person had indeed appeared here. Furthermore, she was most likely the person that everyone was thinking of. A storm is about to arise. More than one person had this thought. After a while, everyone was finally relieved when they saw that that person didn't return. Warlord Sun, goodbye. The man who was previously addressed as Mr. Fong stood up and said. He had to bring this news back immediately. Warlord Sun didn't intend to keep him. He was still in a daze. Why did Qi Zhixiao come here? Don't be fooled by the fact that they were pondering about how to mobilize their troops every day. When faced with Qi Zhixiao, no one would not be afraid. After leaving the warlord's residence, Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan asked, Miss, where are we going now? Their bellies were already deflated. Let's eat, the Empress said faintly. The two of them looked at each other with joy in their eyes. After finding a restaurant, the three of them sat in a side room. The two of them then opened their backpacks and piled the gold jewelry on the table. "Miss, look, this bracelet is inlaid with 9 rubies. It's the most suitable for you. This necklace isn't bad either." While the two of them chattered away, the Empress looked out the window at the streets and pedestrians below. After the three of them had their meal, they casually found an inn to stay in. After arranging a room for Qi Zixiao, the innkeeper stood behind the counter and looked in the direction of the three of them. Her body trembled slightly. If someone were to see her at this moment, they would definitely be shocked by her expression. Her eyes were glowing, and the corners of her mouth were raised to an angle that was difficult for ordinary people to reach. "She's too perfect. I have never seen such a beautiful person. I really want to skin her and make her into a doll to keep. I'm so excited. The thought of collecting such a beautiful doll makes me unable to control myself. My saliva is about to flow out." After standing behind the counter for a long time, she finally found some tea leaves to brew. Then, she added something else to it. Following which, she swayed her body to the second floor and knocked on the door. "Sir, would you like some tea? This is a good tea that I picked myself from the cliff." The Empress took a sip of erguotu and said, "Leave us. Don't disturb me without my instructions." Chapter 445. That night, at the Uli Inn, 2 figures appeared in the pitch-black lobby and quietly went up to the second floor. One of them took out a pipe and pierced through the window paper. Then, he blew into the room forcefully, and a tube of powder was blown into the room. After blowing the knockout powder into both rooms, the two of them were relieved when they heard no sound from inside. The two of them were very confident in the intoxicating powder that they blew into the room. This powder was made from intoxicating flour and other ingredients after many years of research and development. It was very potent. An ordinary person would need 7 days to wake up after being poisoned by this powder. A man-will expert would need 3 days, and an earth-will expert would need more than half a day. Even a spirit-will expert would be slightly affected. Hee hee, hee 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 hee. One of them chuckled with a charming and sweet-sounding voice. The lady boss was very excited. Tonight, she would definitely be able to make a puppet that was worthy of being treasured. "Have you brought everything?" The lady boss asked excitedly. 16 skinning knives and 48 spirit needles. "Aren't they all in this box?" "Since you are in such a hurry, I'm afraid that you have found something good." "What good is there for me?" the other person said. It was a man's voice. "Good. You will know what good it is when you see her." The lady boss chuckled and pinched him. She had already decided that for this puppet, she would give up this inn and find another city to live incognito. Therefore, she didn't hesitate to make her move in the inn. She was afraid that something would go wrong along the way. A perfect puppet was her lifelong pursuit. What did she hear people say the last time? She could die in the evening if she heard the truth in the morning. She deeply agreed with this sentence. As long as she could make a perfect puppet, she had nothing else to ask for in the rest of her life. The man laughed, took out a small bottle, opened it, and sniffed it. Then, he pushed the door open. "Go in, don't just stand here." The lady boss was slightly dissatisfied when she saw that he didn't move after pushing the door open. However, the man's words made her expression change. "Why are you fine?" The man's voice was full of disbelief. This drunken powder was the result of many years of research. Even his master was knocked out by a packet of it. One had to know that his master was a famous poison expert in Tianjing Basin, but he was still knocked out by the drunken powder, let alone other people. He saw a woman in red sitting at the table in the middle of the room. She rested her chin on one hand and looked at the door with bright eyes. She did not look like she was drugged at all. I would like to know what benefits there are. The Empress's tone was bone-chilling. The lady boss's expression changed several times before she scolded, "Useless thing. If the soft way doesn't work, then the hard way. We don't want this in anymore. Capture her and leave the city immediately." She then turned to the room and smiled. "You're unlucky to have met me. Who asked you to be so likable?" She then turned to the man beside her and said, "What are you waiting for? Don't hurt her skin, or it won't look good." Right now, all she could think about was making a puppet. It was rare to encounter such a perfect material in her lifetime, and she couldn't care less about anything else. Under her urging, the man beside her scurried toward the room. His feet moved a few times on the ground as if he was gliding. With a flip of his hand, a ray of light seemed to split the darkness in the room. It was a short knife that was 1 foot and 70 centimeters long. The gleam of the knife was like jade, but it wasn't the normal white color. The next second, the gleam of the knife appeared in front of the Empress's throat as if it was going to pierce through the throat of the woman sitting at the table. He was confident that as long as he touched it, the force would pass through the tip of the knife and shatter the other party's throat. At most, it would only leave a small mark. However, all these thoughts came to an abrupt halt in the next moment. His heart was beating wildly, and he was almost unable to control the panic in his heart. He only saw a pure white hand holding onto his knife. It was as if the knife had grown roots. No matter how much strength he exerted, it didn't move an inch. Almost at the same time, another figure flipped over his head and aimed a pair of short thorns at the Empress's eyes. The Empress's other hand tapped a few times in the air, and every time she tapped the tip of the short thorns, the lady boss only felt a strong force coming from her hand and sending her flying. According to the direction she was going, she was afraid that the top of the door would be sent flying, and the people in the inn would naturally wake up. At this moment, the Empress stood up, stretched out her hand at lightning speed, and pulled the lady boss back. She tapped one of their heads with her finger, and immediately, blood spurted out of their orifices and fell to the ground. However, if one took a closer look, both of them were still alive. Only then did the Empress unhurriedly lit the lamp and close the door. Following which, she opened the box that both of them carried with them. Inside, there were 16 knives of different sizes. The big ones were the size of a palm, and the small ones were only the size of a finger. In addition, there were a bunch of bottles and 48 silver needles. The Empress held the needles in her hand, looked at the two of them, and then inserted them into their bodies one by one. As an Empress, the most important thing to do was to be fair. There couldn't be one more person, and there couldn't be one less person. Normally, these words were useless, but at times like this, they had to be used. After all 48 needles were inserted into the heads of the two of them, the Empress sized up the 16 knives of different sizes. Although they didn't speak directly, she clearly understood what the two of them said just now. The moment she heard about the skinning knife and the spirit needles, she knew what they meant. At this moment, she naturally wouldn't be lenient. Although the two of them were already half a step away from death, these things still had to be used on them. The Empress carefully arranged the 16 knives, and then divided them into 2 parts of different sizes. When she felt that the 2 parts of the knives were about the same size, she inserted the knives into the bodies of the 2 of them. After doing all this, the Empress was in a much better mood. They really didn't know what was good for them to do with her. The last person who dared to do anything to her. Thinking about it carefully, she really hadn't met anyone who dared to do anything to her. Especially when it was such a disgusting and infuriating idea. If it wasn't for the inconvenience of being outside, she would have hung the 2 of them to dry. After torturing the 2 of them, the Empress rummaged through the bottles and jars on their bodies. She didn't know what the 2 of them had blown into the room just now, but Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, who were next door, should have been poisoned as well. After sniffing the bottles one by one, the Empress felt a headache coming on. She didn't understand these things at all. At first, she didn't expect the two of them to have so many bottles and jars on their bodies. There were more than 10 bottles in the box, and there were still 7 or 8 bottles on their bodies. She didn't know which were the antidotes and which were the poison. Seeing that the two of them were still breathing, the Empress poured some of the 2 bottles into their mouths. The woman's face began to turn green, then purple, and finally, blisters began to appear all over her body. Her body also began to swell, and after a short while, yellow liquid began to flow out of her body. In a short period of time, she became a thin piece of human skin, and everything inside her body turned into pus. On the other hand, the body of the other person became brightly colored. Streaks of blood appeared on the surface of her body, and then exploded. Finally, all that was left was a lump of flesh. After throwing the 2 bottles to one side, the Empress turned around and went out of the inn. She knocked out the waiter and the chef, and then brought them to another empty room. Only then did she bring the bottles and jars over for the 2 of them to test the antidote. The room just now was filled with the stench of blood and stench, and it was already unbearable to stay in. After tossing and turning for 2 hours, the Empress finally found the antidote. Even the livestock in the back of the inn were all dead. Chapter 446. The Empress gave the 2 of them the antidote and left the inn the next morning as if nothing had happened. However, Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were puzzled as to why the Empress had woken up so early and was actually waiting for them outside. Also, where were the inn owner and the child? The 2 of them had a headache as if they had been drunk. After the 3 of them left, the unforeseen event in the inn was quickly discovered, and the warlord's men surrounded the inn. However, the scene was a mess, and Warlord Sun began to doubt whether it was Qi Zixiao. After all, with her status, how could she do such a thing? However, an old man from the magistrate's office quickly cleared his doubts. From the boxes and medicine bottles scattered everywhere, as well as the waiter, cook, and the poultry and livestock in the backyard, it was obvious that the other party was testing medicine. In addition, the traces left in the 2 rooms were similar to the smell in one of the medicine bottles. After testing the effect of the medicine, the whole process came to light. Even Warlord Sun couldn't help but say, sins committed by heaven can be forgiven, but sins committed by oneself can't be avoided. However, despite saying this, Warlord Sun no longer doubted the identity of that person. Both Yu Dao and Feng Er were at the earth will level, yet they died so easily here. The other party was indeed a spirit will expert as he thought. In that case, it had to be the person he was thinking about. At the thought of this, Warlord Sun wanted to praise himself for being smart and quick-witted. If not for his quick thinking, the warlord residence would probably be gone by now. He would go back and marry a concubine to calm himself down. Although he thought this way, he knew that a big change was coming. Tianyun Mountain stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and there were many rare treasures on the mountain. The highest peak of the mountain pierced through the clouds as if it was connecting heaven and earth. Therefore, it was called Tianyun Mountain and was also the highest mountain in Tianjing Basin. Renbachin already knew that there was an alliance in Tianjing Basin, but he only heard about it later. However, some things were only heard later. This alliance was called the Hidden Alliance, and it had only been formed in the past 20 years. The one who organized this alliance wasn't one person, but a group of people. A group of people who had rebelled against the Hao nation and were defeated by the Aboriginals. They had no choice but to sign an agreement and be chased into Tianjing Basin. Initially, those people rebelled against the Hao nation for the sake of their ideals or power, but they ended up in such a state. Some of them refused to give up after entering the valley and formed the 3 major factions of Tianjing Basin. A portion of them had no interest in fighting for power with them. Instead, they formed their own sects, wanting to pass down all their knowledge so that one day they could go out. There were also some who were completely disheartened and lived in seclusion. Many years later, a few of them ran around and gathered all the experts who lived in seclusion, forming the first secret alliance. At that time, Tianjing Basin was also in a state of chaos. Various factions attacked each other and wanted to annex the other factions to form an independent faction. They wanted to unify all the people in Tianjing Basin before fighting the Aboriginals. During that period of time, the people in Tianjing Basin had no way of making a living. After that, the secret alliance roped in the various sects and negotiated with the three major forces. That was how the current situation came about. However, although the three great forces seemed to have stopped fighting on the surface, in reality, they were still playing dirty tricks. After all, during that period of war, the three sides had also formed many personal grudges. However, there was still a sense of righteousness. In the face of righteousness, all parties tried their best to restrain themselves. At most, there would only be some small disputes, but there wouldn't be any large-scale wars. Currently, the secret alliance was nominally united with the three major forces and various sects to form an even larger alliance. They gathered their strength in Tianjing Basin and prepared for a future war. After understanding the history of the secret alliance, Renbochin couldn't help but admire them. He didn't admire the secret alliance, but Shiwanya. Such a large organization was created right under his nose, and he actually didn't know much about it. He could be considered a talent whose brain was full of muscles. If he didn't make this trip, he reckoned that this group of people could really stir up some trouble. After all, Tianjing Basin had been accumulating for so many years, and there were many practitioners. There were tens of thousands of man-will experts, hundreds of earth-will experts, more than 10 spirit-will experts, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers. If there were so many ants, they could even bite an elephant to death. If Tianjing Basin were to really become chaotic, Dayo would probably have to suffer a lot. In particular, the northeast was at war with the Yun nation. In the north, Great Xia was still unwilling to give up. In the southeast, there was the Qin nation, which no one knew what they were planning. With all these factors added up, Dayo was really doomed. When that time came, he would have to go to the 60,000 mountains with the Empress to farm and hunt, and his son would run around the village naked. Thinking about that kind of life, Renbochin felt that it was better for them to die than for him. Unlike at the Golden Ring residence, when everyone arrived at the foot of the mountain, someone went up to report, and soon came down to bring everyone up the mountain. They followed a small path, shuttled through the forest for a while, and finally passed through a kernel. What appeared in front of Renbochin was a farmland and a village. It was the most ordinary kind of village in the mountains. There were hundreds of sparsely scattered houses in the village, and there were crooked fences made of wood outside the houses. Some of the courtyards even had bundles of firewood. If he didn't know his destination, Renbochin would really find it hard to believe that this was where the secret alliance was located. Weren't they all so-called experts? At the very least, they should be more outstanding, right? For example, like Huang Yaoshi, who planted peach blossoms and played the flute when he had nothing to do. However, looking at this old lady who carried 2 tall firewood into the village, she was too down to earth. Are you surprised? I was also surprised when I came here for the first time. Zhang Kaixian bounced to Renbochin's side and looked up. Very surprised, Renbochin answered truthfully. However, the grandparents here are very nice people. Zhang Kaixian grinned at Renbochin, bounced to the front, and said, Grandma Hu, I'm here to see you. Girl, you're here again. The old lady looked to be in her 80s or 90s. She was carrying 2 tall firewood, but her movements weren't slow at all. She turned her head and smiled when she saw Zhang Kaixian running over. Do you need help? I can help you carry a small bundle. Zhang Kaixian deliberately stretched out a finger and gestured, indicating that it was a small bundle. Girl, you are still so considerate. My waist really can't carry it anymore. As the old lady spoke, she quickly reached out and pressed all the firewood on top of Zhang Kaixian's head. It's a small bundle. Jean Caissien quickly raised the firewood with both hands and watched as the firewood got lower and was about to drown her. Although it was firewood, it was very dense and weighed at least 500 kilograms. How could she lift it? It could already be said that her skills weren't bad since she wasn't immediately pressed to the ground. The people from the Golden Ring residence quickly ran over to help, but by the time they rescued Jean Caissien, her head was already full of firewood. Renbachien didn't say anything and slowly followed behind everyone toward the village with Lin Chaola. At the entrance of the village, there was an old man with wrinkles all over his face, who was wearing traditional clothes, sitting in the shade and reading a book attentively. Seeing everyone come over, he raised his head and smiled at them. Only half of his teeth were left in his mouth. Come. Someone help me see if there's a second half of this book. I have already flipped through it several times, but I don't know if there's a second half. Grandpa Chiao, I will help you in a while. I have read a lot of books these days, so maybe I have read it before, Jean Caissien shouted while holding a bundle of firewood. You can't read it. You definitely haven't read it before. The old man quickly said. Why can't I read it? How do you know that I haven't read it before? Jean Caissien wasn't convinced. Men can read it, but women can't. Girls can't read it either. The old man shook his head. Chapter 447. Do you want to read it? The old man didn't show the book to Jean Caissien and asked Renbachien instead. Thank you. Renbachien happened to be interested in this world's erotic literature and had no reason to refuse. Seeing that Renbachien readily agreed, the old man smiled like a chrysanthemum and said, You're a good person. You're much more sincere than those who obviously want it but say no. The surrounding people were speechless. Are those who read erotic literature with you a good person? Are those who go to the brothel with you blood-related brothers? Renbachien happily took the book and even said politely, Thank you for sharing. This made the old man smile even more happily and praised, You're a good person. You have good taste and are polite. The others didn't understand, but Renbachien did. Only an experienced person like him would understand such things. Looking at the major forums on the internet, there were trolls running amok everywhere. Just a casual sentence would cause people to spew a torrent of abuse. Everyone was filled with hostility. Only the netizens in 1024 all said, Thank you for sharing. The original poster is a good person. Good people will have a peaceful life. There was almost no hostility. Therefore, everyone was a good person. I'll take it with me then. I'll return it to you later. Renbachien held the book in his hand and gestured. If you like it, you don't have to return it. You can return me a new one in the future. A treasure sword for a hero and a beauty for a beauty. The old man was very generous. However, Renbachien still felt that something was wrong. A treasure sword for a hero, a beauty for a beauty, and erotic literature for, Renbachien felt that he shouldn't think about this in detail. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the old man was scolding him. However, the old man was smiling like a chrysanthemum in full bloom and even gave him erotic literature. How could he let Lin Chaola scratch his face? Renbachien cupped his hands at the old man and put the book in his arms speechlessly. What's in the book? Let me see. Why can't women read it? Lin Chaola came over curiously. You'll know in 50 years. Renbachien said. After thinking about it, even though Lin Chaola looked alright, she might not be able to get married. Maybe it would be another 100 years. When they entered the village, they would occasionally see old people sunbathing in the courtyard and watering the flowers. They were no different from the old ladies in the village. In any case, he saw a person drawing on a table in the courtyard. The person was squatting in a horse stance, one of his forearms was parallel to the table, and the brush in his hand was drawing on the paper from time to time. This person's every move looked very imposing, and Renbochin finally felt that he had the demeanor of an expert. After all, the people here were all figures of the older generation who had survived the Great War back then. These experts weren't bumpkins, so it wasn't strange for some of them to be proficient in the four arts. Village Chief Grandpa, what are you drawing? Jean Caissien carried the firewood and jumped into the courtyard. Painting mountain, the old man said without raising his head. Jean Caissien stretched her neck to take a look at the drawing before turning her head to look at the nearby tall mountain. She said doubtfully, this mountain is a little fat. So majestic. A little short. He's accumulating momentum to break through the heavens one day. This is obviously a hill, right? This is called looking at the mountain but not seeing it. Little girl, you talk too much. The old man flew into a rage out of humiliation. Even though Renbochin didn't see what the old man was drawing, he understood that this person wasn't an ordinary person to be able to draw a mountain that pierced the sky like a hill. Renbochin felt that this person had the demeanor for nothing, but it turned out that he was a soul painter. As he thought about it, he added, soul painter. The old man had sharp ears, and his eyes lit up when he heard this. He laughed and said, this little fellow knows what's good and bad. The most important thing in painting is the soul, the intent, and not the form. Come, little fellow. My painting can only be seen by people with good eyesight. This old man is a spirit will expert, just a little weaker than me, Lin Chaola added at the right time. She gestured with one hand pointing to the sky and the other pointing to the ground. Renbochin felt that what she meant was, the difference between heaven and earth. However, what did she mean when she said it was a little weaker and gestured like that? Little girl, you talk big. The old man was so angry that he almost laughed. I won't lower myself to your level today. Little fellow, come and take a look at my painting. The old man sized her up carefully and turned to Renbochin. Finding someone who could appreciate his painting was much more important than fighting with others. Sorry to disturb you. Renbochin walked to the table with his hands behind his back after he finished speaking. He had a strange look on his face. This isn't a hill. This is obviously a steamed bun with the outline of another steamed bun behind it. There is also a small stone drawn on the top of the steamed bun. How is it? The old man asked complacently. Looking horizontally into a ridge and vertically into a peak. This poem immediately popped up in Renbochin's mind. From a certain angle, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was an undulating mountain range. Good, well said. The old man immediately laughed when he heard this poem. This poem goes well with my painting. It suits the artistic conception. Is there a next line? Different heights, different distances. Not bad, not bad. The old man laughed as he added these two lines to the painting. Renbochin felt that what the ancient said was right. Hooligans weren't scary, but a cultured hooligan. Not only was the person in front of him a cultured hooligan, but he was also a cultured spirit will hooligan. The little girl at the side was passively looking at the painting, looking horizontally into a ridge and vertically into a peak. She was still carefully studying the ridges and peaks in this painting. The old man then put the paintbrush aside. Seeing that Jean Caissien was still holding the firewood, he said, Aren't you going to send the firewood to Hu Qinghua? Aren't you tired of holding it? Oh. Jean Caissien quickly nodded and seriously said to Renbochin, Your poem is really good. She then ran out with the firewood. The old man stretched out his hand and rubbed it twice before looking up at Renbochin and asking, This little fellow is a member of my sect. Not bad. Not bad. What's your relationship with Yi Sanbue? Renbochin's mind started to spin after hearing this. This old man knew someone with the surname Yi in the Yun Nation. That person was at least 70 years old. If he was still alive, he would probably be an expert. However, he hadn't heard of such a person in Qingfeng City. In that case, there were two possibilities. Either he was an expert from the older generation, or he was the ancestor of the warlord of Qingfeng City and was long dead. Or maybe it was the old man who deceived him. There were often such scenes on TV. If he climbed up the pole and said it was his ancestor, the old man would immediately laugh 3 times and then slap him to death. After thinking for a while, Renbochin said, "I have never heard of this person. May I know how you know him?" The old man was silent for a moment before sighing and saying, "Is that so? I thought I had met an old friend. Time flies, and things remain the same, but people have changed. Come in and talk." The old man waved his hand and seemed to be in low spirits. Renbochin felt that he might be overthinking, but there was no harm in being careful. After all, he was now in the hinterland of the enemy. If he succeeded, it would be easier to pacify Tianjing Basin in the future. If he was seen through, he would probably be hunted down. Chapter 448. The house was very simple and was made of ordinary wood. There was a bed, a wooden cabinet, and the place where the table should be was empty. Renbochin guessed that it was the table outside. However, the most eye-catching thing was the head of a lion-like beast with 6 short horns hanging on the wall. The moment Renbochin stepped through the door, the head suddenly opened its eyes. At the same time, the aura of a ferocious beast hit him in the face. It was as if the head in front of Renbochin was no longer a head, but a ferocious beast that was more than 4 meters long that was about to pounce on him. The ferocity in the eyes of the ferocious beast and the threatening aura made Renbochin have no doubt that he would be torn to pieces in the next second. Renbochin felt as if his heart was firmly grasped by a big hand, and he subconsciously reached for his gun at the back of his waist. Gulp. A clear and crisp gulp came from the middle of the throat, and it sounded like a clap of thunder in Renbochin's head. Renbochin suddenly woke up from his hallucination and saw that the eyes of the head on the wall were still open. The eyes were completely black, like a pitch-black whirlpool that could suck in one's soul. Lin Chaola, who was beside him, was staring at the head on the wall, and her throat was still making gulping sounds. Looking at her hands carefully, he saw that her fingernails had grown by 1 centimeter. The old man carefully looked at Lin Chaola with some surprise, then a muffled shout came from his chest, "Silence!" He flicked a steel nail from his hand and nailed it to the head of the beast. A roar was transmitted into Renbochin's mind. Following which, the head closed its eyes, and Lin Chaola resentfully quieted down. Her eyes never left the head, and she secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "Senior, this is..." Renbochin couldn't help but ask. Although he had seen many things in this world, such as the elongation saber and the chain in his head, and he knew that he didn't know much about this world, the abnormality of this head still shocked him. It seemed as if this head was still alive. "Back then, I met a ferocious beast in the 60,000 mountains with my master. It has been so many years, but it still hasn't settled down." The old man glanced at the head on the wall with a look of reminiscence in his eyes. "It's still alive." Renbochin cried out involuntarily. "How can he be alive like this?" The old man asked with a smile. There was no body, only a head hanging on the wall. No one knew how many years had passed, and no matter how one looked at it, it could not be more dead. However, whether it was the opening of its eyes or the roar, he had just experienced it personally. "What happened just now?" Renbochin asked doubtfully. "He's dead but not dead," the old man said lightly. "Can I trade that with you?" Lin Chaola pointed at the head, her eyes shining. "Oh. What do you want to exchange for it?" The old man laughed. "This one is much more valuable than yours." Lin Chaola reached into her tube top and took out 3 white rabbit creamy candies that carried her body fragrance. Judging from her expression, she seemed to be in pain. 3 white rabbit creamy fruits was her limit. What is this? The old man looked at the thing in Lin Chaola's hand curiously. He had never seen this thing before. Renbochin silently grabbed the 3 white rabbit creamy candies from her hand and placed another 3 in her hand. Although she was a hard-working girl, he felt embarrassed to see her being taken advantage of like this. My 3 are a little bigger. Give me another one. He didn't expect Lin Chaola to turn around and raise an objection. Renbochin was speechless. He silently took the 3 candies from Lin Chaola and placed the warm one back into her palm. He couldn't be bothered with her. Creamy candies are delicious. You definitely won't be able to find them anywhere else, Lin Chaola said confidently to the old man. Forget it. This thing is dead but not dead. It's useless for you to take it. The old man shook his head. Let's have a fight. If I win, give me that. Lin Chaola saw that the exchange had failed, so she immediately changed to snatching it. However, this was exactly what she wanted and saved 3 white rabbit creamy fruits. What do you want that Jishua's head for? The old man was a little puzzled. It looks delicious. Lin Chaola was almost drooling as she looked at the head. Are you ready? I'm going up. Lin Chaola even reminded him out of goodwill. The old man was speechless. Let's go out. I also want to see what an expert who is just a little more powerful than me looks like. The old man gestured with his hand. It seemed like he hadn't forgotten the difference between heaven and earth that Lin Chaola had just said. Lin Chaola's body gracefully leaped and landed in the courtyard. The old man smiled at Renbochin before walking out unhurriedly. As soon as Renbochin followed him out, he saw 2 figures colliding. Their figures couldn't be seen clearly at all, as if 2 gusts of wind had collided. The sound of bodies colliding was constantly heard in the air. As soon as the fight started, more than a dozen figures suddenly jumped out of the village and landed around the courtyard. All of their faces were wrinkled, and some of them couldn't even straighten their backs. These were the experts who had survived until now. After sensing that there was a fight here, they ran over to watch the fight. Ah! In less than a minute, a scream was heard. It was from the old man. Renbochin was finally relieved that Lin Chaola didn't suffer a loss. Stop! I don't want to fight anymore. After a while, the old man shouted again. His figure gradually turned from illusory to solid as he stood there. The old man's clothes were tattered, his face was scratched, and he had a complicated look on his face. He wasn't a weakling among the spirit wool experts and was one of the top experts in Tianjing Basin. Losing to a young girl made him look bad. However, what was worse was the other party's methods. Why was she scratching people? She even scratched people's faces. Didn't she know not to hit people in the face? Originally, even if the old man lost, he would only say that the younger generation would surpass the older generation. At most, he would be shocked, guess the origin of the other party, and feel disappointed. He had to admit that he was old. At such a young age, even if she started cultivating in her mother's womb, how could she be so powerful? However, at this moment, he didn't have any other thoughts. His mind was filled with, who did this girl learn from? Why was she scratching people? Everyone looked at the situation in the courtyard, looked at Lin Chaola, who was licking her claws, and then looked at the old village chief with ugly expressions. Qing Yun's sword, who had dominated the world for many years, was defeated by a little girl just like that. Where was the Qing Yun's sword who had dominated the world with his sword? Qing Yun's sword. Pfft, your old bones are about to be buried in the ground. A tall old man with white hair and beard had a complicated look on his face. Finally, he cursed bitterly and leaped more than 30 meters away. After a few steps, he couldn't be seen anymore. Another old man shook his head and sighed. We are old, we are all old. More people turned around and left with complicated looks on their faces. Qin Yun's sword was the name of the old village chief back then. It was a name that suppressed many people and was also a symbol of an era. Today, he was defeated by a young man, which made everyone feel a little sad and disappointed. The old man opened his mouth for a long time. After a while, he touched his face and said with a gloomy expression, "Can't we not scratch our face?" Ren Baqian was speechless. It seemed like being scratched on the face was more unacceptable to him than being defeated. The old man's lips moved a few times before he sighed faintly and said, "Back then, I was also handsome, elegant, and outstanding. It was all because of this face." Chapter 449. 2 hours later, Ren Baqian and Lin Chaola sat by the fire. Ren Baqian held a stick in his hand and roasted the Jieshue's head over the fire. Lin Chaola was in charge of drooling, which flowed down her chin, neck, collarbone, and onto the plains. Her eyes were dull and drooling, and she looked exactly like a mentally disabled child. But every time the eyes on the head began to move, she would slap them and return to her previous appearance as a mentally disabled child. The old man sat not far away, and a sense of sorrow rose from the bottom of his heart. This mentally disabled little girl had scratched his face. Beside him was Zhang Kaixian. She sat on the steps with one hand supporting her chin as she looked at the beast's head being roasted over the fire. "Why isn't this thing cooked yet?" Ren Baqian felt that his hands were sore. He had been roasting it for more than an hour, but there were no signs of it being cooked. If it were that simple, why would I have suppressed it here for decades? You can forget about roasting it in this lifetime. The old man heard Ren Baqian's doubts and immediately raised his head, looking like an expert giving advice. "What should I do then?" Ren Baqian asked shamelessly. "If it were alive, you wouldn't be able to do anything. However, it died a long time ago and isn't completely dead yet. Just soak it in the juice of the three-way flower for 3 days and start a fire with phoenix wood to roast it," the old man pointed out. "How about eating it raw?" Ren Baqian thought about it and felt that it was too troublesome, so he turned his head and asked Lin Chaola. Lin Chaola pursed her lips. On the one hand, she felt that this thing tasted better when it was cooked, but on the other hand, she didn't want to wait too long. She had a strong appetite when she saw this thing. If she had to wait for another day, her saliva would flood the village, let alone 3 days. "Village Chief Grandpa, do you have the three-way flower and phoenix wood here?" Zhang Kaixian asked the old man. "How can you find them here? These things can only be found in the 60,000 mountains. Even in the 60,000 mountains, I'm afraid that you won't be able to find them without 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, you won't be able to chew them raw. Back then, even my master had to expend a lot of effort to kill this thing." The old man shook his head. After hearing this, Lin Chaola didn't hesitate any longer. She immediately took the Jieshue head out of the fire and began to gnaw on it. It made a crunching sound as if she was gnawing on wood, and Ren Baqian felt his teeth ache just from hearing it. Roar! Another furious roar appeared in everyone's mind. It was as if Jieshue's head was letting out an unwilling roar. Lin Chaola gave it a backhand slap and continued to chew. With a smile on his face, the old man calmly looked at Lin Chaola gnawing on the fruit, as if he could already foresee the result of her failure. No matter what, he had finally vented his frustrations. Then, everyone watched helplessly as Lin Chaola bit off a piece of skin from Jieshue's head. "Hiss, how is that possible?" The old man's eyes widened. He had heard about this world puppet from his master. It was said that it was impervious to swords and spears, impervious to fire and water, and difficult to injure with great strength. Even his master had spent a great deal of effort to kill this Jieshue. Even after so many years, he couldn't do anything to Jieshue's head. His Qingyun sword could be considered a treasure sword that could cut through iron as if it were mud, and it only produced sparks when he slashed at it. However, this little girl could actually bite it. Her teeth were sharper than the Qingyun sword. Then, the old man's gaze suddenly became sharp as he stared at Lin Chaola. Renbaqian immediately became vigilant. Sure enough, she isn't a human. I initially thought that she had practiced some special martial arts, but it turns out that she isn't a human, the old man said coldly after looking at her for a while. What do you mean? Renbaqian's heart skipped a beat when he saw his expression. Don't play dumb. The old man said coldly. Then, he stared at Lin Chaola for a while before sighing and saying, forget it, I can't care about this anymore. What do you mean, senior? I really don't know, Renbaqian said as he thought that he might be able to find out about Lin Chaola's origin from this old man. It's useless to say more. Good luck. The old man didn't want to talk about this matter anymore. Although he didn't speak anymore, his expression became much colder. Renbaqian knew that the old man definitely knew something. Seeing that the old man wasn't willing to say more, Renbaqian frowned and wondered how he could get more information out of the old man. In fact, the old village chief didn't know much. Back then, his master had just broken through to the spirit world level and went to the 60,000 mountains, but he returned with serious injuries. Before he died, he said that those who weren't stronger than him shouldn't go to the depths of the 60,000 mountains and should be careful of those who looked like humans but weren't. Previously, he didn't understand why, but now that he saw Lin Chaola, he suddenly remembered his master's words. This was related to the truth of his master's death, so he naturally wanted to know more. However, the battle with the Aboriginals was imminent, so he forcibly suppressed his thoughts. He had also made up his mind that after this battle, he would capture this woman no matter what price he had to pay and interrogate her about what was hidden in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. After the old man calmed down, he raised his head and asked Renbaqian, tell me your purpose for coming here. Renbaqian repeated what he had said at the Golden Ring residence. I have 3 requests. First, you have to strengthen your attacks and attract the attention of the Aboriginals. Secondly, they didn't have enough weapons. Thirdly, she has to follow us. The old man pointed at Lin Chaola and said. Shiwanya isn't easy to deal with. Experts of the same level aren't his match in a one-on-one fight. Her skills are pretty good, and if she makes a move, she will be able to delay Shiwanya for some time. We can then surround and kill the other 2 Cardinal Heaven experts in the army. I can promise you the first and third requests, but the second one is a little troublesome. It's not easy to transport weapons from the Yun Nation, and now we're at war. It won't be easy to transport a large number of weapons over. It will consume a lot of manpower and resources, and it will be easier to be discovered, Renbaqian said after pondering for a while. That's your problem. After all, if you guys were to go against the ancient race alone, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to hold on for long. If you want us to risk our lives, you have to show us something, the old man said coldly. Renbaqian retorted, Great Xia is here too, right? I wonder where he is. What conditions did he promise you? Also, without us, you guys won't be able to do anything. We can totally wait for them to attack Wangjing and delay the line of soldiers before making a move. The pressure we have to face is almost the same as if we were to make a move now, the old man said. As for the Great Xia people, that's between us and them. The Aboriginals are training new soldiers, Renbaqian reminded him. Their target is definitely you guys. Alright, I promise you that I will find a way to transport the weapons over within 3 months. You guys must make a move after 3 months, Renbaqian said after pondering for a while. In fact, none of these 3 conditions could be fulfilled. However, they had to put on a good act. That's settled then. There are empty houses in the village. You guys can stay there for the night. The old man threw these words and returned to his room. At night, Renbaqian and Lin Chaola sat in an empty room. Lin Chaola was still gnawing on the Jiasu's head. When there was no one around, she suddenly looked up and said, "Should I go and kill him? He's hostile. Continue gnawing on your Jiasu first. Now isn't the time yet." Renbochin waved his hand and looked at Lin Chaola, who continued to gnaw on the Jiasu's head. Looking at the old man's big reaction, this guy in front of him had a lot of secrets. There were also a lot of secrets in this world. The thing in the belly of Mount Liutsue, the unknown location of the Sword Mountain, the mystery of the disappearance of the previous two emperors, and now, the origin of Lin Chaola. Chapter 450. Early in the morning, Renbochin stood at the entrance of the village and looked into the distance. A few youngsters were practicing martial arts there. Some of them were practicing swordsmanship and fists. These were the disciples of the elders in the village. After all, those elders were active experts 70 years ago. Many of their lifespans were nearing the end of their lifespans. In order not to bring all their knowledge to the earth, they tried to find a successor to pass on their legacy. Renbochin watched from the side for a long time. The martial arts of these youngsters were very different from the Fist of Death that he had learned. Compared to their martial arts, the Fist of Death was more direct, more open, and more suitable for killing on the battlefield. It also fully displayed the strength of the Aboriginals. On the other hand, their martial arts were completely based on the martial arts of Jianghu. They were more inclined to maneuver in a small area, fight one-on-one, and use more feints. Another important point was that their moves looked good. At least, they looked very elegant when they moved. Unlike the Fist of Death, which only had Black Tiger Steals the Heart, it didn't look as good as their martial arts. When used by the Aboriginals, the Fist of Death was completely overpowered and powerful. However, Renbochin didn't have the strength of the Aboriginals, so the power of the Fist of Death was much weaker. Renbochin felt that if he were to fight against these youngsters, he might not be their match. At the thought of this, Renbochin felt even more miserable. Not only could he not defeat a 10-year-old Lolita, but he might not even be able to defeat a random cat or dog. How could he endure this? On the contrary, the set of boxing techniques that the Empress taught him was the most suitable for him. It had a strange style and was completely aimed at killing people. Many of the moves were imitations of the movements of beasts pouncing on human experts. This set of boxing techniques was completely used to hunt people. It was a pity that the movements of this set of boxing techniques were too difficult. Many of the movements were very strange and didn't conform to human bone structure and strength. At that time, he saw the Empress execute it smoothly, but when it was his turn, he simply couldn't execute many of the movements, let alone practice it. Up until now, he still couldn't execute all the movements and still focused on practicing the Fist of Death. "Brother Lin, this move of yours is wrong. You have to move it downwards by 30%. Sister Hua, this move of yours is missing 2 sword flowers. You have to exert more strength on your wrist." A clear and melodious voice sounded. The little girl, Zhang Kaixian, ran back and forth to help everyone give pointers on the moves. It was hard to believe that Zhang Kaixian, this little girl, was actually better than these people in terms of martial skills. These elders liked Zhang Kaixian's character very much. When she came last time, many elders passed on a few cultivation techniques to her. Her innate talent was also pretty good, and there were many areas where she practiced better than the disciples of these elders. After staying here for 2 days, she was sent by those elders to correct the mistakes of these disciples in their moves. If it was someone else doing this, they would definitely be hated by others. "I practice every day, and you only learned a little. Yet, you're actually better than me. How can I not be angry?" However, Zhang Kaixian's innocent and romantic personality made people unable to hate her even if they wanted to. Renbochin stood at the side for a long time. He wanted to give it a try. After all, he had never fought with someone who was at the same level as him, and he didn't know what level he was at. However, when he thought about the 2 sets of fish techniques he could use, he could only give up on this idea. The killing fish was too obvious. He couldn't use the fish techniques of the Aboriginals at all. The other one was the tortoise fish. After thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. After eating breakfast, Rinpoche was ready to leave. He still had to go down the mountain to inform the Yun nation to transport the weapons over and prepare to look at the other cities. When Rinpoche found the old village chief's house, more than 20 elders were actually sitting in the courtyard. There's no need to say anything. If we kill her, they will definitely be in chaos. Even if there will be a cleansing and revenge, how can there be no deaths in war? The tall, white-haired elder that Rinpoche saw before said. His white hair fluttered even though there was no wind, and he looked imposing. Over the past 2 days, Rinpoche had also learned the name of this elder. He was called the Celestial Hound. It was said that once he set his sights on someone, he would bite them like a dog and not let go. Furthermore, he had a bad temper and even dared to roar at the heavens. That was why he had such a name. However, most people didn't dare to say this in front of him. Otherwise, he would not rest until one of them died. The old dog's words are correct, another elder said as he knocked on the bamboo cane in his hand. This is a good opportunity. Don't hesitate, another elder said. Shiwanya will definitely take revenge, and I don't know how many people will die. That's a matter for the future. Just like what the old dog said, how can there be no deaths in war? We can't miss this opportunity. Contact all the experts at the Earth will level and above. No matter how powerful she is, she's just one person. I don't believe that the entire Tianjin Basin can't kill her alone. Rinpoche walked to the door and stopped. Everyone's conversation was heard by him. Who were they trying to kill? From what they said, it should be the higher-ups of the Aboriginals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have involved Shiwanya and said things like crazy revenge. The person they wanted to kill was also very powerful, to the extent that it was boundlessly powerful. They needed to gather all the experts in Tianjin Basin to besiege and kill her. At this thought, Rinpoche was stunned. There was no need to think about it. Besides the Empress, there was no one else who met these conditions. But what was the situation now? Was the Empress in Goose City or somewhere else? Both of you, come in, the old village chief, Qingyun Sword, said in a clear voice. Rinpoche calmed himself down and said, I see that everyone is discussing something. I don't know if I'm disturbing you. Come in and talk, Qingyun Sword said. Rinpoche and Lin Chaola stood at one side. Lin Chaola was still holding the Jie Shui's head, which was almost half the size of her body. After 2.5 days, she had gnawed more than half of it. What was visible was the purplish-red shriveled flesh and white bones. It looked very horrifying. There's a piece of news that has just arrived. It's very important to us and to all of you. You need to take action too, Qingyun's sword said after glancing at Lin Chaola. Please. Rinpoche cupped his hands, but his heart tightened. Qi Zixiao appeared alone in Tianjin Basin. How can that be? Although Rinpoche was already prepared, he still couldn't help but be surprised after hearing what the other party said. Why would the Empress appear alone in Tianjin Basin? What was she doing here? Qingyun's sword felt that Rinpoche's reaction was very normal. He was also surprised when he heard this news. After all, the Empress of Dao actually came to Tianjin Basin alone. It was indeed puzzling. Of course, she wasn't alone. There were 2 maids by her side, but in everyone's eyes, she was alone. Rinpoche already knew their plan, but he still asked subconsciously, You guys are preparing to. That's right. Gather all the experts and besiege her. Therefore, we need all of you to contribute, Qing Yun's sword said in a deep voice as he looked at Lin Chaola. His target was Lin Chaola. As for Rinpochen, it wasn't that he looked down on him, but he was really a piece of trash in terms of martial arts. That's how it should be. Seeing that Qing Yun's sword had made his decision, the celestial hound immediately slapped its thigh and laughed heartily. Even if I die there, it will be worth it. Besieging and killing the fifth most powerful expert in the world and the Empress of Dao was a big deal. Chapter 451. Everyone discussed for a long time before returning to their residences. In less than an hour, 7 or 8 elders left the hidden village with lofty sentiments. Needless to say, they were calling their friends and inviting people to come out of the mountains. Those who were personally sought out by this group of old fellows were definitely not ordinary people. These old fellows went out to look for experts who lived in seclusion. In addition to those experts who lived in seclusion, there were also the 3 major powers and various large and small sections. Those who participated in this siege were all experts at the Earth will level and above in Tianjing Basin. If it weren't for the inconvenience of mobilizing so many experts and the fact that the Empress's whereabouts weren't fixed, they would have arranged for a large number of ordinary elite soldiers and man-will experts to wear down the Empress's strength. Under the circumstances where the Empress's whereabouts were uncertain, only experts could reach the destination in the shortest time possible. Something big has happened. This was the only thought in Rinpoche's mind. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? Originally, Rinpoche wanted to get some weapons to stabilize them and enter their ranks to understand their entire plan. When the time came, he could make targeted arrangements and eliminate all of them in one fell swoop. However, all his plans had been disrupted. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? She didn't bring any guards and only brought Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan. The Empress wasn't a god. Although she was very powerful in Rinpoche's eyes, even the 5th most powerful expert in the world wouldn't be able to escape if she was surrounded by hundreds of Earth will experts and more than 10 Spirit will experts. After all, ants could kill an elephant if there were too many of them. The boss had to be defeated by a group of people. What should he do next? The best way was naturally to find the Empress and leave Tianjing Basin. However, it wasn't easy to find the Empress in Tianjing Basin. Even in a city, he would brush past her, not to mention that he only knew the approximate area. Finding the Empress was like looking for a needle in a haystack, so it was better to follow the main force. Then what? The Empress and Lin Chaola, along with him, Qing Yuan, and Hong Wuan, who were burdens, faced countless experts. No matter how he thought about it, there wasn't much of a chance of victory. As for himself, he really couldn't help much. For Earth will experts, conventional weapons weren't of much use, let alone spirit will experts. Nuclear bombs. Let's not talk about whether or not they could obtain those things. Even if they could, they would perish together. Poisonous gas. It seemed feasible. However, after thinking about it, he was an outsider and surrounded by experts. If he took out a bunch of bottles, it would definitely arouse suspicion. When that happened, he would be slapped to death. Furthermore, the speed at which the poison spread was too slow. Those experts were fast and had strong resistance to poison, so it was impossible for them to poison more than a few people. Using poison had the same problem as using nuclear bombs, which was that it was not easy to get their hands on such weapons of mass destruction. Apart from these, he could not think of any other method that would be useful in such a case. In this situation, there were not many weapons on Earth that could be of use. His last resort was to bring everyone back to Earth and hide for 5 days. He would wait for the Empress to kill a batch of them first. At the crucial moment, he would bring everyone back to Earth to recuperate for a few days before returning. However, it wasn't easy to grasp the timing. With so many experts fighting, the situation could change in an instant. He had to bring along the Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Yuan, and Lin Chaola. One could well imagine the difficulty of this task. Forget it. Presumably, there was still some time before they could gather enough people to reach the target area. He would think about other methods during this period of time. Renbochin felt a headache coming on. He simply wanted to sigh. Your Majesty. Didn't you stay in Gu City? Even if you wanted to come to Tianjing Basin, you should have brought more people with you. Renbochin turned his head and saw that Lin Chaola was still gnawing on her lion head. It has been more than 2 days. Don't your cheeks hurt? However, Renbochin felt that her face was a little too big. Could this be the legendary gills? Lin Chaola scratched people's faces for no reason. Renbochin really suspected that she was related to cats. If she was really a cat girl, then it would be logical for her to be tanned. When she was done gnawing, he would be able to see her bun-like face. They want to kill Her Majesty. Don't you have anything to say? Renbochin looked at her happily gnawing and couldn't help but ask. What? Lin Chaola looked up in a daze. They want to kill Her Majesty. Why? Where? Who? Lin Chaola's reaction was almost a replica of who she was, where she was, and what she was doing. Nothing, you can continue gnawing. Renbochin covered his head. That afternoon, Renbochin returned to Earth. At night, when the moon rose, the figure of the old village chief, Qing Yun's sword, appeared outside the courtyard. Is Mr. Yi in? No. Lin Chaola gnawed on the lion head while speaking vaguely. Where did Mr. Yi go? Qing Yun's sword was a little puzzled. He should be in the room at this time. Lin Chaola put down the lion head and tilted her head to think for a long time. In the past, Renbochin had told her how to deal with such a situation. What did he say again? After thinking for a long time, Lin Chaola finally remembered something. Her voice was full of dissatisfaction and anger as she said, What time is it now? Do you have any civility to disturb me at such a late hour? Wait for me to go out and beat you to death. The last word was extremely charming and full of twists and turns. In addition, when she was gnawing on the lion head, she mumbled something. Qing Yun's sword's thoughts immediately went astray. I'm sorry, Mr. Yi, come to my room tomorrow when you wake up, Qing Yun's sword said, flicked his sleeves, and left quickly. After walking for more than 100 meters, Qing Yun's sword looked up at the sky as if he was looking at his lost youth. The next morning, Renbochin came back with an arrow on his back. He was thinking that with so many people around, the Empress might not be able to see him. If he played a pomp and circumstance, his voice would be very recognizable. Needless to say, the Empress would know where he was. In addition, there was a pile of fortified smoke bombs. The main thing was that he didn't know what to bring. After thinking about it, he thought that this thing might come in handy, so he prepared some first. When he came back, he looked at Lin Chaola and felt that her face seemed to have grown a little bigger. Soon after, he opened the door, sat in front of the room, and tuned the strings. Then, he played a pomp and circumstance. After a series of short notes, the moans of the arrow reached everyone's ears. Damn it, what's that sound? Xiao Tianquan, who was wiping his weapon in the room, cursed. Why does this sound so weird? Who's playing this instrument? I want to slap him to death. A series of curses sounded within the range of Renbochin's arrow. However, there was still someone squatting in front of Renbochin, holding her face with both hands, and listening attentively. After Renbochin finished playing Pomp and Circumstance, he immediately felt refreshed. Sure enough, I'm an Arab player who was held back by my studies. What's this? It's very nice. Zhang Kaixian squatted at the entrance of Renbochin's courtyard and said. Renbochin's spirits immediately rose. Thinking about how his era was suppressed in front of the palace, Renbochin always felt heartache. Now, he finally had a soulmate. Can you teach me? Zhang Kaixian asked again. Sure. Renbochin nodded and agreed without hesitation. Renbochin now felt that this little girl in front of him was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. A soulmate was hard to find. Chapter 452. There were more than 10 households in Pingfeng Valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. An old woman with a walking stick and a young girl stood at the entrance of the valley for a long time before slowly walking down. Master, is the person who lives here very powerful? The young girl wanted to help the old woman, but she was stopped by the old woman. It's fine at home, but don't do this outside. I'm not so old that I can't walk, the old woman replied. Then, he answered, if it weren't for the continuous battles that damaged his foundation, I'm afraid he would have already attained the spirit will level. With his talent, how could he be stuck at the earth will level without any progress? As he spoke, he seemed to see that shy youth who always carried a paper umbrella on his back and had dimples when he smiled. At that time, she was around 20 years old and was in her prime. Unfortunately, fate made fools of people. So powerful. The young girl stuck out her tongue. There were only 13 spirit will experts in the entire Tianjing basin. This person must have been a famous person back then. The old woman walked very slowly as if she was admiring the scenery on both sides and adjusting her mood. Following a small path, they walked for a full hour before they reached the entrance of the village. When the children saw strangers, they looked at them curiously before dispersing. Only a naked boy with a ponytail and a runny nose was left. He ran up to the two of them, wiped his nose with his dirty fingers, and asked, "Who are you looking for? Who are you looking for?" "Does Changtian live here?" the old woman asked with a smile. "There's no such person," the child replied after thinking for a while. "Oh." The old woman nodded and walked forward. "I already said that there's no such person. What else do you want?" The child asked curiously as he followed the two of them. He raised his hand and wanted to grab the young girl's clothes. The material of the clothes wasn't what the villagers wore, but he hesitated. When the young girl saw his actions, she quickly moved to the other side of the old woman. If she was grabbed by his runny hand, she would lose her clothes. "As long as he's not dead, he's here. Even if he's dead, I want to see his grave." The old woman replied first, then turned to the young girl beside her and asked, "Are you going to sell me out so quickly?" "Master, I was wrong." The young girl quickly lowered her head and turned to the other side of the old woman. A hand covered in snot suddenly grabbed the hem of her skirt, causing her face to twitch. She looked like she was about to cry. So soft. The child touched the skirt enviously, then quickly ran into the village. "Run, Grandpa Chang. An old monster is coming to take you away." The old woman's firm footsteps suddenly came to a halt, and a sullen expression appeared on her face. However, it quickly dissipated and was replaced by a light and joyful feeling in his heart. He was indeed still here. A moment later, she stopped in front of a door and saw an old man sitting in the courtyard, pasting paper on an umbrella. The old man looked to be in his 60s. His white hair was combed behind his head. He was concentrating on the work at hand. When he finished, he put the umbrella aside and looked up at the old woman with a smile. "Long time no see. Dozens of years, countless thoughts, and in the end, it all turned into a single sentence, long time no see. You've broken through." The old woman's face lit up with joy. "Yes, I originally wanted to repair my foundation, but no matter how much effort I put in, it was all in vain. Eventually, I gave up and worked here every day to feel everything around me. I didn't expect to break through. Life is still unpredictable. Chang Tian said in a relaxed tone, completely ignoring how disheartened he was and how he gave up everything to come to this village. Good, good. You can live a few more years than me. Remember to visit me on my grave every year. I'm afraid of loneliness, the old woman said with a trembling voice and tears in her eyes. Okay. Chang Tian replied with a simple word. After the old woman passed away, he moved to her grave and guarded her every day so that she wouldn't be lonely. The old woman sized up everything in the courtyard as if she wanted to imprint the entire place where this old man had lived for decades in her heart. She sorted out her emotions and said, "This time, I'm here to invite you out of the mountain." "I'm not interested in those things anymore," Chang Tian replied faintly. The Empress of Dao, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. She's currently in Tianjing Basin, the old woman said. Upon hearing this, Chang Tian's expression finally changed, and the faint smile on his face disappeared. How many people? There's only her and 2 servants who are merely at the peak of the man-will level. Who else is going to make a move? Including your 17 spirit-will experts and all the earth-will experts in Tianjing Basin. The young girl beside the old woman turned to look at her master with her mouth wide open. Weren't there only 13 famous spirit-will experts in Tianjing Basin? Including the people in front of him, there were only 14, good. After I finish pasting this umbrella, I'll follow you down the mountain. This umbrella is what I promised, and I can't make half of it. As the old man spoke, he held the paper umbrella in his hand again. Even if he had let go of everything, there were still some things that he couldn't let go. It wasn't for himself, but for the millions of people in Tianjing Basin. One day later, 3 figures stood at the entrance of the valley and turned to look back. More than 10 villagers were standing not far behind the 3 of them. They were holding a bundle in their hands. Elder Chang, I've picked some mulberry seeds that you like to eat. I've packed them in this bundle for you to eat on the way. Also, I've packed the dough balls that I've made with Suzy leaves for you. Grandpa Chang, come back soon. The old man took a deep look at each and every one of them. He remembered all these simple villagers in his heart before taking the bundle and saying, "There's no need to send me off. I'm leaving and will be back soon." On Mount Qingniu, 5 figures strode down the mountain. 4 of them not only dressed the same, but even their appearances were exactly the same. The only differences were that one of them had a mole on the left corner of his mouth, another had a mole on the right corner of his mouth, one had a mole above his lip, and the last one had a mole below his lip. Roar! One of them roared, and the other 3 opened their mouths in unison. Their voices were so loud that they traveled dozens of kilometers. All the beasts on the mountain were frightened to the ground, and all the birds soared into the sky. Ha 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 ha, there will be a day when the 4 of us can make a move. Let's take a look at those old bastards and see how many of them are still alive. At the Golden Ring residence, Zhan Chongkong, Painting Fairy, and the various attendants stood in front of the residence. At this moment, everyone was different from when Renbochin first met them. Everyone was armed and overflowing with murderous intent. "Su Huan, after we leave, the residence will depend on you," Zhan Chongkong said. "Chief, why don't I go while you and Madam stay behind?" A man in his 30s said. "Since we are going to do it, we have to do our best. This matter concerns everyone in Tianjing Basin, so how can we be afraid of death? Furthermore, with your talent, there is hope for you to enter the spirit-will level in the future. Also, if Kaisian comes back, take good care of her." Painting Fairy's eyes were full of tenderness as she watched her husband give his instructions. In Wangbei City, the main door of the residence in the middle opened, and a dignified middle-aged man strode out. Behind him were more than 10 men and women wearing helmets and armor. In front of him was a cavalry of hundreds of people. The middle-aged man looked ahead, turned around, and said, "Zai, come here." "Father." A valiant-looking young man strode forward. "If I don't come back, the North Alliance will be handed over to you," the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The night before, he had already told his son about all the important people in the North Alliance, including who he could trust and who he couldn't. Regardless of who came back alive, his son would have a countermeasure. However, before they set off, he was still a little worried. "Father, you will definitely come back safely." "I wish you a triumphant return," the young man said in a clear voice. Qi Zhixiao, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, who dares to say that they will come back alive? The middle-aged man laughed. Then, he hesitated for a moment before slowly placing his hand on the young man's head and touching it. This was the first time he had touched the young man's head like this since he was 5 years old. "Father." The young man's eyes were a little red. "Sissy." The middle-aged man couldn't bear to see him like this and scolded. A few women wearing helmets and armor behind him immediately glared at him. Let's go," the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. "The North Alliance." Many of the cavalrymen in front straightened their bodies and shouted. "Southern Metropolis, Green Bellflower, Lingshan Sect, Mengsing Pavilion, Nine-Blade Sect, Death Toad Sect." Whether they were famous or not, whether they were well-known sects in Tianjin Basin or gangs that were looked down upon by the people, whether they were the higher-ups of the three major powers or the elders living in seclusion in the mountains. Chapter 453. Ren Baqin sat in the courtyard in a daze. The sound of wood being sawed could be heard not far from him. Zhang Kaixian was playing the era happily, and her face was blooming with happiness. Lin Qiaolo was sleeping on the wall. Yes, on top of the wall. Bang! Every time this sound was heard, Lin Qiaolo would fall off the wall and climb back up drowsily. According to her, the room was too quiet, and the sound of sawing disturbed her sleep. She simply ran outside. Although it was noisier, the noise of people on the street made the sawing sound less prominent, and she could fall asleep this way. The city that Ren Baqin was in was called Ming City, and it was located in the center of Tianjin Basin. He came with the people from the hidden village. Before they arrived, the nearby sects had already gathered here. There were dozens of earth will experts and one spirit will expert. This was only the surrounding area. After his group arrived, more people arrived in succession over the past 2 days. Ren Baqin couldn't help but worry when he thought of what he heard. All the experts in Tianjin Basin were rushing here. Now, the Empress had really become the big boss. The current situation was equivalent to all the guilds and individual players in the entire server forming a team to defeat the world boss. Ren Baqin had participated twice when he was playing games and felt that it was pretty cool and hot-blooded, especially with the background music, which made people's adrenaline soar. Looking at everyone's fighting spirit and thinking about how the world boss was his fiancé, Ren Baqin cursed in his heart. If he had a slightly more reliable person, he would have sent him to deliver a letter to Goose City. However, Lin Qiaolo. Ren Baqin was afraid that she would fall asleep halfway. The hot weather coupled with the ear-piercing sawing sound made Ren Baqin a little impatient. He stood up, walked around the courtyard twice, threw a piece of white rabbit creamy candy at Lin Qiaolo, informed Zhang Kaixian, and walked out of the courtyard. After he walked out, he turned his head to take a look. Sure enough, Lin Qiaolo was following him silently. Who do you think will win? Ren Baqin couldn't help but ask. He had already asked this question many times. Lin Qiaolo replied with the same sentence, don't you already have a guess? But you are an expert, so you have better foresight and know more than me. If it were me, I would at most be able to face 3 spirit will experts. If there were any more, I would have to run. However, I will bring you along when I escape, so don't worry. In any case, Lin Qiaolo still remembered that he was her owner. However, this wasn't what he was worried about. Renbachyan stopped talking and shifted his gaze to the four old men who looked the same, except for the mole near their mouths that was in a different position. The four of them noticed his gaze and smiled amiably. They then glanced at Lin Chaola and brushed past the two of them. Renbachyan looked back and saw that the four of them were heading in the direction of the warlord's residence, which was now the headquarters of many experts. He had never seen these four people before, so they must be experts who had just arrived. With each passing day, the number of experts in the city would increase. The streets were very lively. Warriors with weapons could be seen from time to time, and all of them were metal weapons. "Brother below, would you like to come up for a drink?" Renbachyan heard the shout above him and looked up. He saw a man leaning on the window of the second floor of a shop next to him, looking in his direction with a smile on his face. Renbachyan looked to his left and right and heard the man shout, "Brother from the Yun Nation, would you like to come up for a drink?" Renbachyan then confirmed that he was indeed called. He thought for a while and walked up to the second floor. This was a restaurant, and there weren't many people at this time. A young man in his 20s stood by the window on the second floor. He was very good-looking, gave off a sincere feeling when he smiled, and was dressed in embroidered clothes. He was the young man who called out to Renbachyan just now. Seeing the two of them come up, he cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, brother." "Greetings, senior. You know me?" Renbachyan asked. "Mr. Yi Yunxian. Or should I say, Principal Ren, would you like to sit down and have a chat?" Renbachyan's mind buzzed at the young man's words. An uncontrollable murderous intent emerged from the bottom of his heart as he coldly said, "Kill him." It never crossed his mind that the other party was trying to trick him. This was because ordinary people would never imagine that the so-called guest from the Yun Nation would actually be the husband chosen by the Empress. Furthermore, the other party directly said that he would be the principal. It was obvious that the other party knew a lot of things. As soon as Renbachyan finished speaking, she transformed into a gust of wind and pounced at the man by the window. "Wait, it's not an enemy." The young man on the other side swayed a few times before flipping over and jumping out of the window. However, in less than 3 seconds, he crashed through the window with a claw mark on his face and fell back in. Without saying a word, Renbachyan took out his gun, raised his hand, and fired 3 shots at the other party's head. "We're not enemies, let's work together," the young man shouted as he flipped over and dodged Renbachyan's gun. "Stop." Renbachyan hesitated for a while and finally spoke up. He wanted to hear what Renbachyan had to say. Seeing that Lin Chaola had returned to his side, the man heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, the young man wasn't as calm as before. His body was covered in wood shavings, his hair was disheveled, and his face was covered in claw marks. He was so close to getting his head smashed open by Lin Chaola. The young man took a few deep breaths and threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper, who ran over after hearing the noise as compensation. He then smiled bitterly and said, "It's really dangerous to deal with Principal Ren. Your skills are not bad." Renbachyan praised insincerely. Speaking of which, this person's skills weren't bad. The difference in strength between a spirit will expert and an earth will expert was like heaven and earth. Previously, when Renbachyan was attacked in Lon City, the Earth Will Guard commander was killed in an instant when the other party suddenly attacked and used a heaven-grade weapon. Although this was due to the sudden attack and the use of a heaven-grade weapon, Lin Chaola was much more skilled than the assassin from before. Even a spirit will expert like Qing Yun's sword wasn't her match. It was already amazing that this young man could withstand at least 2 blows from her without dying. In addition, the other party wasn't even 30 years old. Presumably, among the younger generation, besides people like the Empress and Li Yuanzhu, he could be considered one of the best. The young man sat down at the table next to him, and Renbachyan followed suit. After the other party took out a bottle and applied some medicinal powder to his face, the wound on his face began to heal quickly. However, the newly regenerated skin was still a little tender, and the scratch marks could still be seen. "Who are you?" Renbochin calmed down and asked faintly. "You should have heard that someone from Great Xia is also here." The young man laughed and didn't seem to be affected by the life and death experience just now. If it was someone else who almost lost their life just now, they wouldn't be able to calm down even if they wanted to cooperate with you. Just based on his temperament, he wasn't an ordinary person. "It's you." Renbochin was surprised. He didn't expect the other party to be sent by Great Xia and know his identity. However, he kept saying that he wanted to cooperate with him, and he didn't know what he meant. "Principal Ren, you can call me Su Qing." "How did you recognize me?" Renbochin asked. This was what he wanted to know the most at the moment. "I've seen the 7th prince and happen to know that Principal Ren and the 7th prince look exactly the same." The young man smiled. Renbochin suddenly realized that this was where the problem lay. "I didn't expect Principal Ren to change your identity and become a citizen of the Yun Nation to infiltrate the headquarters of the Secret Alliance. I think it isn't a coincidence that the Empress of Dao appeared here." Chapter 454. Renbochin, can I say that I'm here to do social research? In the end, after he left Valley City, the plot took a drastic turn for the worse. It was completely different from what he had planned before he came here. God knows how it turned out to be like this. "What do you want to cooperate with?" Renbochin asked. "These people are finished. These days are the last glory of this place." Su Qing looked out of the window and sighed. "Actually, I was a little worried at first. I was worried that the Aboriginals would really be chased back into the mountains after being attacked from all sides. The Yun Nation, Tianjing Basin, the Qin Nation, and finally, Great Xia were going to be besieged by all the other nations, and the result was predictable. After all, the brains of the Aboriginals. You know. I don't think they can come up with a solution to this situation." Su Qing gave Renbochin a knowing look. "This scene may be what many people want to see, but it's not what I want to see. The Qin Nation has sent their troops." Renbochin immediately grasped some information from his words. "Probably in the next few days. Perhaps they have already sent out their troops." Su Qing did not hide it. There was no need to hide this kind of news. As long as Renbochin left Tianjing Basin, he would soon receive this news. "What do you want?" Renbochin asked. "I don't want Great Xia to have no enemies. Initially, when I saw this trap of yours, I should be happy that a smart person has appeared in the ancient race. However, I soon got worried again. If you guys were to settle everything too quickly, Great Xia might shrink back after realizing that it was impossible. That's something I don't want to see either," Su Qing said. Renbochin immediately understood Su Qing's words. What he meant was that he hoped to see Great Xia being dragged into a quagmire and unable to extricate itself. At the very least, they had to make Great Xia reorganize their troops for another battle after suffering a crushing defeat. Great Xia's resources and soldiers were almost depleted. If they wanted to regroup and fight again in a short period of time, they had to recruit a large number of soldiers. If there weren't enough conscripted soldiers, they might even have to recruit able-bodied men. Furthermore, it would be difficult for Great Xia to prepare enough resources for hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a short period of time. Hence, they would have to increase taxes. If there were places where the people had no way of making a living, and someone with the intention of raising their arms and calling for help, it was likely that a rebellion would immediately occur. If Great Xia defeated the Aboriginals, they would be able to bring back their army to quell the rebellion. However, if Great Xia were to once again fall into a quagmire or even lose the war with the Aboriginals, their foundation would definitely be shaken. After thinking for a while, Renbocchen thought about the problems that might arise if Great Xia were to send troops again. The crux of the matter was that the war between the Aboriginals and the other nations couldn't end in a short period of time. Otherwise, the Aboriginals would fall into a stalemate. Only then would Great Xia, who had just suffered a great defeat, make up their minds. As for taxes, the other party probably knew the situation in Great Xia better than him. Also, would the people have a hard time making a living? This wasn't a problem at all. As long as there were people on the same side in a certain city, and they had such thoughts, it was very easy to make a certain area become a place where the people had no way to make a living. Then, all that was left was to raise his arm and shout. Renbocchen felt that his theory wasn't entirely correct, but it was highly possible. He didn't ask if the other party wanted to rebel. Instead, he tapped his finger on the table a few times and asked, "What's in it for us?" "A weak Great Xia is safe for you," Su Qing said. "No, we don't need it. We don't care if Great Xia is strong or weak." Renbocchen shook his head. With him around, with the advancement of science and technology, it was conceivable that Dao would become prosperous and powerful in the future. Why would he care about whether Great Xia was strong or not? In the next few years, a decade, or even decades, it would put pressure on Dao. Renbocchen then said with some contempt, "Moreover, if it's just Great Xia alone, what kind of storm can it set off?" It wasn't that he was looking down on anyone, but in terms of strength, the Aboriginals could beat 10 of them. "You underestimate the people of the world and Great Xia too much," Su Qing said. "Wu Xingho has been scheming for so many years. If it weren't for those messy things of yours, I'm afraid that the north of Dao would have been lost." "You know a lot?" Renbocchen asked. Su Qing smiled and didn't answer this question. After all, many things that had been used on the battlefield couldn't be hidden from others. In fact, what he cared about the most wasn't the things that Renbocchen used on the battlefield. Instead, it was the ease with which the Aboriginal troops were mobilized in battle. This included the current battle in the northeast. The Aboriginal generals were able to command the troops with ease, respond extremely quickly, and their combat power had increased by more than 30%. This was something that Great Xia couldn't achieve. He guessed that there must be a reason for this. Although there was no evidence, he had some guesses. If you have any trump cards, then take them out. People die in war. If we drag Great Xia into this, we don't know how many people will die and how much resources will be wasted. This isn't something that can be easily erased. 100 million taels of silver within 3 years. Su Qing said straightforwardly. A year's income of Great Xia's treasury. Can you afford it? Renbochen's heart skipped a beat. 100 million taels of silver was definitely a huge figure. This was Dao's income for more than 10 years. After deducting the expenses of various places, there was basically not much left from Dao's annual income of a few million taels of silver. There were too many things that could be done with this amount of money. Even Renbocchen was a little tempted. Even though he had already made up his mind to seize the entire Yun nation, his goal was to make the Yun nation part of his territory. He definitely couldn't do too much in the Yun nation, and the money that he would get in the end might not be much more than this sum of money. The aristocratic families of Great Xia are still very wealthy. I will get them to fork out this sum of money, but it will take some time for Great Xia to be in chaos. Su Qing smiled confidently. Renbocchen somewhat appreciated this kind of thinking of, "I don't have it, but I can seize it." "In addition, you still have to help me do 3 things, Renbocchen said. The rest were all fake and were things to be done in the future. With this snitch, it would be easier for him to get through this safely. Speak. First, help me send a letter to the Protectorate of Goose City within 2 days. I think you should have people in Goose City, and you should also have some means of communication," Renbocchen said. "Shiwanya should be on his way, right?" However, I can do this. After delivering the letter, my people will withdraw from Goose City. Su Qing smiled. Renbao was relieved to see that Su Qing had agreed. In fact, 2 days after knowing that the Empress had come to Tianjing Basin, he had thought of the radio station. However, what made him want to smash the wall was that the radio station was completely unusable. At first, he thought that it was due to the magnetic field of Mount Tianyun, but on the way here from Mount Tianyun, the radio station still couldn't be used. No matter which channel it was tuned to, there was only a bunch of ear-piercing noise. This made Renbao suspect that there was a problem with the ionosphere above Tianjing Basin, and he had no choice but to give up on using the radio station. This wasn't his fault, but the world's. Lin Chaola was also unreliable. Now that he had Su Qing's help to pass the message, the biggest problem was finally solved. At the very least, in the worst-case scenario, he wouldn't find more than a dozen spirit world experts playing mahjong in a circle when he returned to Earth with the Empress. I will tell you the other 2 things in a few days, Renbao said. I have to do it. I won't make things difficult for you. Renbao smiled. It had to be said that these remnant citizens of the Hao nation were really unlucky. Of the 2 foreign aid, one was an undercover agent, and the other was a snitch. Anyone who knew about this situation would vomit blood. Tell me, other than the muscles in your brain, is there anything else that is presentable? You can't even find the way to the inn, and you made me walk such a long distance, a crisp voice said. You can't find the inn either, right? Another coarse voice retorted. Ha! Do you believe that I will shoot you into the wall? The voices on the street made Renbao's ears twitch. Was this a little Lolita? Why were they here? Chapter 455. Renbao craned his neck to take a look. Sure enough, it was little Lolita. She was holding some local snacks in her hand, and beside her was a tall and well-built student. The 2 of them stood together. Just by looking at their backs, one would think that they were father and daughter. If there's any news, remember to inform me, Renbao said. They don't trust me very much either. After all, you and I are outsiders. In fact, now that things have come to this point, you don't need to worry about anything. Su Qing smiled. Renbao felt that he had a lot to worry about. Whatever the other party thought he didn't have to worry about, he had to worry about. Both sides received unequal information to begin with. I'll have someone deliver the letter to you later. As for the other 2 matters, I'll let you know when the time comes. Within a short period of time, the rebellion in Tianjing Basin won't stop. Renbao nodded at him, got up, and left with Lin Chaola. From beginning to end, his expression was very calm, as if he had a card up his sleeve. No matter what, he had to put on a show. He couldn't let the other party see through him. He was the only one who knew how worried he was before he came to this building. After he left, Su Qing sat there and laughed. He poured himself a glass of wine and took a sip. Great Xia was already rotten and should have been overthrown long ago. Everything that was taken away should be returned. It was a pleasant surprise to be able to meet Qi Zixiao's husband. The biggest reason why he said everything so clearly was because he wasn't afraid that the other party would find out. So what if the Aboriginals knew that Great Xia was going to fall into chaos? The current land in Dao was more than enough for the barbarians to wreak havoc. Even if Great Xia were to fall into chaos, the Aboriginals would at most take advantage of the situation and leave. How could they stay in Great Xia and not leave? Those barbarians didn't have that many people to manage the place. If their territory was too big, they would be stuffed to death. Furthermore, Great Xia wasn't Tianjing Basin, and Qi Zixia wasn't number 1 in the world. When there was a war or a change of dynasty, those experts would not make a move. If the Aboriginals entered Great Xia's territory and didn't want to leave, someone would naturally show up. He believed that 100 million taels of silver would be enough to tempt the other party. The aboriginals wouldn't be able to accumulate such wealth even if they gave it to them for 100 years. These people are dead. Su Qing poured himself a cup and drank by himself. His gaze followed the window and looked in the direction of the city lord's mansion. He thought to himself, then smiled. What did these people have to do with him? Ren Baqian went downstairs and whispered to Lin Chaola, I saw Tong Lan just ahead. Go and find them, but don't alarm them. Come back and tell me. Why do I feel like I'm getting busier and busier? Lin Chaola said with some dissatisfaction. Lin Chaola knew who Tong Lan was. After all, they had gone to the salt well previously and traveled all the way here this time. Even though Tong Lan was sleeping most of the time, she still remembered the youngest girl. Ren Baqian cast a sidelong glance at her and asked, Where did you get the courage to say this? Without waiting for her to refute, he urged, I'll give you 3 more pieces of candy. Hurry up and go. Lin Chaola bared her teeth at him, and in a flash, she landed on the roof of a nearby building. She widened her eyes and searched through the crowd, moving forward. Ren Baqian stretched his body. Now, he could finally relax. Originally, he was still worried that even if he brought the Empress to Earth during a crisis, they would still be surrounded when they returned. That would be troublesome. After all, the other party wouldn't give up so easily. Under the circumstances where there was no other way, they might just wait there. As long as he informed Shiwanya, he didn't need to worry about the following matters. Perhaps their so-called encirclement and suppression of the Empress would really turn into a complete wipeout. If that happened, it would become a trap set by him and the Empress, waiting for those idiots to fall into it. Regardless of whether the truth was true or not, what he said was true. Walking on the street, he wasn't feeling restless anymore. His waist wasn't sore, and his legs weren't hurting anymore. He looked at the shops on both sides of the street with great interest, as well as the pedestrians coming and going. Not long after, Lin Chaola returned to Ren Baqian's side and said, Found them. Following her guidance, Ren Baqian saw Tong Lan in the crowd. That girl was still bickering with the student beside her about the location of the inn. Ren Baqian didn't approach the two of them. He found a shop along the way, borrowed a pen and paper, and wrote some simplified Chinese characters on it. Then, he crumpled the paper into a ball and handed it to Lin Chaola. When the two of them turned into a secluded alley and were about to change to another street, Ren Baqian threw the paper at Tong Lan. Tong Lan reacted very quickly. She immediately leaped into the air, turned around, and saw that the person who threw the paper was Lin Chaola, who was standing on a roof in the distance. It's her. Tong Lan was surprised. Who? The other student asked. The bed warmer by Yague's side. Lin Chaola curled her lips and said, Yague must be nearby. What does bed warming mean? Tong Lan fell into deep thought. This is a good question. The weather is already hot, so wouldn't it be even hotter if someone warms the bed? I will go back and ask Grandpa. She then picked up the paper and said, It seems like it's for us. There will be major changes. Think of a way to inform the other 4 groups to quickly leave Tianjing Basin. Don't pass through cities and towns. Choose the wilderness. Inscription: Your grandfather will always be your grandfather, and your teacher will always be your teacher. Damn that Yague. Tong Lan gritted her teeth and cursed after reading the inscription. In fact, with the simplified Chinese characters and the fact that she had seen Lin Chaola before, she would have known who wrote it even if it wasn't inscribed. However, he had to add such an inscription that made her gnash her teeth. Major changes. These people are going to rebel. Another student subconsciously thought of this answer. After all, most of the students who came here were the children of officials. Even those who didn't know about the situation now knew about the situation here. I'm afraid so. Let's go back and look for them first. Tong Lan glared at him and said, "It's all because your brain has nothing but muscles. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have gotten lost. It's all because they made the city too messy. It's not easy to find them." That student immediately found a scapegoat. Otherwise, he would have been nagged at by this little brat for a long time. Unfortunately, he couldn't beat her. After spending half a day, the two of them finally found the inn. At this time, the others had already gone back for a long time. The two of them called the others into the room and showed the note to them. How can we just run away when they are rebelling? Won't we be laughed at when we go back? Why don't we kill their warlord? That's a good idea. Many people were tempted. It was difficult for them to make contributions on the battlefield with their strength, but now, there was a great contribution in front of them. They also have experts. You guys aren't even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Since Yague has said so, let's leave first. The other group still don't know about this matter. Finally, a rational person spoke up. Chapter 456. That night, Renbochin sealed the letter with wax and sent it to Su Qing after finding out where he lived. Over the next few days, Renbochin saw waves of experts from all over Ming City. On this day, the people from the North Alliance arrived. The leader of the Northern Alliance, Tai Feng, arrived at the scene with a dozen armored generals and hundreds of knights. Tai Feng was a spirit will expert, and he wasn't a weakling. The dozens of generals were all earth will experts, and the hundreds of knights were all man will experts. This wasn't the strength of the entire North Alliance, but the strength of Wangbei City. This city alone was stronger than the Golden Ring residence, one of the 8 major sections. This showed the strength of the North Alliance. Tai Feng hadn't been in the city for long when the Northern Alliance's experts began to gather. They were the most powerful force in the city. The chief of the North Alliance, Tai Feng, is inviting me to a banquet? Renbochin looked at the invitation in his hand and was slightly surprised. He knew that Tai Feng had entered the city and even took a look at him from the entrance. He didn't expect that he would be invited to a banquet the night he entered the city. Should I go? Renbochin read the invitation again and pondered for a while. To be honest, he didn't have any intention of building a good relationship with these people. There was no need. However, it was good to go and see the experts from all over the world. At least, he would be able to know some of them. In addition, he wanted to see if he could get any useful information. That night, he went to Tai Feng's banquet. He didn't get any useful information, but he did get to know some of the important people in the North Alliance. In addition, the dance of the group of naked girls that night had left a deep impression on him. Very deep. It was so deep that he even dreamed of a demonic dance at night. After waking up, Renbochin directly threw the underwear into the trash can without any intention of destroying the evidence. This kind of thing wasn't worth paying attention to in modern times. After thinking about it carefully, he hadn't touched a girl for a long time and didn't know when he would be able to touch the Empress when he reached the earth will level. He was living the life of a monk with a pure heart and few desires. He didn't know if it was planned, but the first day the North Alliance arrived, and the second day the Southern Metropolis, one of the 3 major powers, also sent an invitation to Renbochin. After 2 consecutive nights of demonic dances, Renbochin felt as if weeds had grown in his heart. On the 3rd day, the green bell flower from the 3 major powers finally arrived. A group of female soldiers. Before the arrival of the green bell flower, Renbochin had great fantasies about this power with a beautiful name and a large number of women. After all, the name itself could confuse people greatly. However, when he saw the woman sitting on the back of an elephant with a waist circumference of 8 feet and an arm-thick iron rod hanging beside the elephant, he was so scared that he almost fell off the wall. Just looking at the one in front was enough to make him lose interest in the people behind him. Fortunately, the female army of the Green Bellflower had no intention of hosting a banquet. Otherwise, Renbochin would have to rack his brains to think of a way to reject them without incurring a grudge. He was not afraid of offending people, but he did not want to be stared at during this period of time. In the past 3 days, apart from the 3 great powers, there were also sects of various sizes, including 7 of the 8 great sections. He even met the famous Mengsing Pavilion in Tianjing Basin. They arrived at the same time as the Green Bellflower, but they entered the city later than the Green Bellflower. Compared to the undeserving reputation of the Green Bellflower, Renbochin had to admit that the Mengsing Pavilion lived up to its name. Not to mention the experts dispatched by the Mengsing Pavilion, the dozen or so disciples accompanying them could be considered heavenly beauties. In particular, with more than a dozen cold-looking beauties going together, the quantitative change caused a qualitative change that really made people unable to take their eyes off them. When the Green Bellflower and the Mengsing Pavilion arrived, Qing Yun's sword gathered everyone together for the first time. The venue was the warlord's residence. There were many people who came. Not only were there big and small powers, but there were also those senior experts who lived in seclusion. Even if only the main figures from the big and small powers went, including those experts who lived in seclusion, there were still 200 to 300 people. At the appointed time, Renbochin and Lin Chaola met Su Qing and an old man at the gate of the warlord's residence. Both parties looked at each other with a tacit understanding in their eyes. Mr. Yi, after talking to you the last time, I was suddenly enlightened. You have dabbled in astronomy and geography, and I really admire you. I can't wait to have a detailed discussion with you. Su Qing smiled and greeted him loudly. Renbochin was stunned. What was going on? Could it be that they were going to flatter each other? Renbochin immediately replied, You flatter me. I also yearn for your affairs in the brothel. In particular, I yearn for the Bingdi lotus and the 4 blooming flowers. This time, it was Su Qing's turn to be stunned. What was going on? What happened to flattering each other? I boasted that you have dabbled in astronomy and geography, but you said that I have affairs in the brothel. This doesn't seem to be right. Su Qing looked around and saw that the people from the Mengsing Pavilion who had just entered were looking at him with disdain. There was nothing wrong with going to the brothel and showing off to the men, but it was more disgusting for the women. Su Qing laughed and said, Mr. Yi, you must be joking with me. Haha, of course. Su Qing then winked at him, and both of them walked in side by side without saying much. There were too many experts around, and even a whisper couldn't be concealed. After entering the warlord's residence, they saw a circle of tables in the courtyard. At the front were the seats for the major powers, and Renbochin and Su Qing each had a table. Behind them were the sects and experts who lived in seclusion and the leaders of some small powers. As the two of them found their seats and sat down under the guidance of the attendants, there was still a steady stream of people coming in. Renbochin felt that this was a martial arts conference. However, the purpose wasn't to elect the chief, but to suppress the devil who had brought disaster to the martial arts world. Well, that's right. That devil was his fiancée. The courtyard was bustling with voices, and all kinds of greetings and attempts to establish relationships filled everyone's ears. Renbochin turned to look at Lin Chaola and saw that she was almost banging her head on the table. Fortunately, this chaos didn't last long. Qing Yun's sword stood at the front and pressed his hands on the table. Everyone, please be quiet. His voice was heard throughout the whole. The courtyard immediately quieted down. This is the most complete gathering we have ever had. It's truly a grand occasion. Qing Yun's sword sighed with emotion. The three major powers, the sects and experts who lived in seclusion were gathered together. Even 70 years ago, there wasn't such a scene. After all, after a series of wars, more than half of the experts had withered. I'm sure everyone knows the reason for gathering all of you here today. The fifth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao, the Empress of Dayou, is currently in Tianjing Basin. This is our chance, our best chance. If we seize this opportunity, our descendants will no longer be trapped in this cage and will be able to soar freely in the vast sky. I won't say any more nonsense. Some of you here can see that day, and some won't. Including me, no one knows if they will survive this battle. However, everyone still came here without hesitation for the same goal. For everyone in Tianjing Basin and for our descendants, what we see isn't just this vast sky, Qing Yun's sword said as he pointed to the top of his head. Everyone felt the same way. Qing Yun's sword's words resonated with everyone's hearts. Qi Zixiao was very strong. She was so strong that no one here was a match for her in a one-on-one fight. Even if many of them fought together, they still wouldn't be a match for her. However, some things had to be done by someone. Where there was blood, there had to be people. Many of them had already made arrangements for their funeral, and some had even prepared coffins. Among them, there was good and evil. There were experts who were well known in Tianjing Basin, and there were also hermits who mingled in the streets. They might not be able to see the future, but they wanted to fight for a future for the people of Tianjing Basin. This was the roar of all of them after being imprisoned for 70 years. It was their resistance. Where is she? Someone shouted with a murderous aura. Where is she? Kill her. Kill her and kill our way out. Kill our way out. Following Qing Yun's sword speech, everyone was boiling with murderous intent. She's waiting for us. Qing Yun's sword's words made everyone quiet down. Ren Baqin frowned slightly. She's 400 kilometers away from here and hasn't moved for 3 days. She sensed us and is waiting for us, Qing Yun's sword said in a deep voice. I don't know if we should say that she's arrogant and underestimates us, or that she's arrogant and has too much confidence in herself. I originally wanted to surround her after gathering everyone, but I didn't expect her to simply stop and wait for us there. Hearing this, Ren Baqin sighed in his heart. Your Majesty. You should be more careful, not far away, Su Qing glanced at Ren Baqin. This was the preparation to pull in the net, however, he didn't see the complacent look on Ren Baqin's face. Instead, he looked bitter and hateful. Chapter 457. After that, Ren Baqin focused half of his attention on listening to Qing Yun's sword's arrangements and the other half on thinking. He occasionally turned his head to look at Lin Chaola, who was sleeping soundly with her head propped on the table. Her saliva was dripping from her mouth and forming a large pool on the ground. Ren Baqin felt that she might need to sew her mouth shut. She looked like a pretty girl, but why was she drooling every day? Qing Yun's sword was still making arrangements at the front. After all, they weren't going to surround and kill the Empress. That wouldn't be very effective. Qing Yun's sword divided the Earth Will experts into 11 groups and divided them into inner and outer formations. This way, they could maximize everyone's strength and reduce casualties. However, they only had 3 days to practice these formations. By then, everyone's level of cooperation would determine the power of these two formations. Fortunately, everyone was an Earth Will expert, and their reactions were much stronger than ordinary people and Man Will experts. Even if time was tight, they should be able to practice the formations to a certain standard. Everyone discussed until it was very late before they left. Ren Baqin returned to his residence, wrote a letter, and then looked for Su Qing. He finally realized that the mutual flattery in front of the warlord's residence was very useful. At least it gave the two of them a reasonable excuse to meet so late at night. My men have already left Goose City. After all, their identities have been exposed, and there is no value in staying there. Su Qing wasn't surprised by Renbaqian's arrival, but he was surprised by his request. After all, Renbaqian had already sent a letter back, and he didn't expect him to send a second one. In his opinion, since he had already set up a trap, he just had to wait for these people to step into it. He didn't understand why Renbaqian was so anxious to send a second letter. Unless they didn't make any arrangements. As soon as this idea popped up in his mind, he dispelled it. Qi Zixiao's appearance here had attracted everyone's attention, and Renbaqian's appearance among these people was already a very obvious trap. It was impossible for there to be any mistakes in the arrangements. In fact, even if there were mistakes, it didn't matter. With Qi Zixiao's strength and the Protectorate of the North led by Xihuanya, as long as these people gathered together and attacked, they would be able to eliminate more than half of them. The remaining people wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. The second condition. Renbaqian stretched out 2 fingers while Su Qing was thinking. Su Qing looked at him and laughed. He stretched out 2 slender fingers and took the letter from Renbaqian's hand. Do you want to stay and chat about the affairs of a brothel? He waved his hand and left. What was the point of listening to others talk about brothels? I'll go there myself when I get back, but I'll have to find Tong Zhenye to take the blame. For the next few days, everyone was pulled out of the city to practice the array formation. At the same time, they were waiting for the few people who hadn't arrived yet. Most importantly, there were 2 spirit wool experts among them. Renbaqian hoped that these days would continue. According to the time, Xihuanya should have already set off with his men. Renbaqian didn't know if the second letter had reached him. The second letter contained the Empress's location. If the Empress was really waiting, the siege should be taking place in the vicinity of that city. However, things didn't go as Renbaqian wished. 3 days later in the evening, Renbaqian received a notice to set off the next morning. Renbaqian calculated the time and realized that it should be 5 to 6 days before Xihuanya received the letter. Even if he left immediately, it would only be 5 days. Renbaqian had walked for about 20 days from Goose City to this place. However, he traveled in an ox cart and took a long detour. If he rode at full speed and took into account that the mounts needed to rest, it would take at least 10 days to reach the Empress's location from Goose City. This meant that Xihuanya wouldn't be able to catch up no matter what. If everything went well, he should be able to see Xihuanya when he brought the Empress back to Earth. Another thing that Renbaqian wasn't sure about was how many spirit wool experts would survive the fight with the Empress and face Xihuanya. If there were too many, he was afraid that Xihuanya would be sending himself to die. Renbaqian calculated in his heart. There were too many variables, and he couldn't calculate them clearly. He could only take it one step at a time. That night, Ming City was much quieter. They would set off the next day and would arrive in 2 days at most. Everyone took this time to adjust their state of mind or check their weapons. Even Renbaqian had checked the fortified smoke grenades to see if they would be able to contribute to the war. At least, according to Renbaqian's estimation, these people's formations wouldn't work. The important thing in this batch of fortified smoke bombs wasn't the smoke itself, but the substance added to the smoke bombs. The smoke was a complementary product. What was added to the smoke bombs was concentrated skunk musk. This was the secretion of skunk. It was said that the moment one was sprayed with the skunk liquid, it felt as if someone had smashed the back of their head with a baseball bat. Then, a pair of big hands twisted their lungs into a ball, and they couldn't breathe at all. Needless to say, it was painful to the eyes. She immediately burst into tears and could even make people faint. This wasn't just an attack on the sense of smell, but also touch, sight, taste, sixth sense, and seventh sense. Furthermore, this smell would linger on the body for about a week, even if it was carefully cleaned. This smell was indescribable. The difference between stinky tofu and this thing was probably the difference between Lei Feng and Lei Feng Pagoda. The substance added to Renbachian's smoke bombs was said to be 2 to 3 times stronger than skunk musk. It was enough to make people doubt their lives and doubt that being alive was a mistake. Under the circumstances where weapons of mass destruction couldn't be used, Renbachian felt that this thing might be the most effective. Of course, in a certain aspect, this thing could also be said to be a type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, this thing also had a lot of shortcomings. The biggest one was probably that using this thing was equivalent to perishing together. After all, if this thing was thrown out, even if it was thrown in the surroundings, he and the Empress would probably be enveloped by that terrifying smell. Renbachian didn't dare to imagine the Empress's expression at that time. It would definitely be very interesting. After thinking about it, Renbachian shivered and immediately encouraged himself. If possible, he didn't want to use this type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, in order to save people, he had no other choice. Sigh, this is life. Renbachian sighed, turned his head, and glanced at Lin Chaola, who was leaning against the headboard. If he remembered correctly, this girl's sense of smell seemed to be much better than his. Lin Chaola suddenly quivered in her sleep, looked at Renbachian with sleepy eyes, and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing, continue to sleep." Renbachian waved his hand. The night passed. The next day, everyone set off. Chapter 458. In an inn in Wu City. "Miss, are you leaving today?" Qing Yuan opened the window, and Hong Wuan brought the Empress a basin to wash up. "No," the Empress replied faintly. In her mouth was a toothbrush that she brought back from Earth, which was much more comfortable to use than a tree branch. In the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan, a small toothbrush was very luxurious. At least, other people, including the ministers of the imperial court, used a tree branch to clean their mouths. "Is there anything here that Miss is concerned about?" Qing Yuan asked softly. The Empress usually stayed in the previous cities for 1 or 2 days before leaving. However, she had stayed here for 7 days, which puzzled the two of them. "I have seen what I wanted to see, and it's about time," the Empress said after washing up. "What time?" "If the remnant citizens are going to make any moves, they should be here in a few days." "I thought they would come a few days ago," the Empress said. In fact, after leaving Longzhou City, she found that there were people paying special attention to her in every city. Some of them were street vendors, some were passers-by, and some were city guards. Since then, she knew that she was being followed. She originally thought that she would see some people soon, but unexpectedly, it was very calm. Under the calmness, an even more turbulent undercurrent was brewing. The Empress wanted to see the experts among the remnant citizens, see what they would say to her, and see what tricks they had up their sleeves. In addition, she didn't know if that guy knew that she was here. Many people in Tianjing Basin should know, and he should be aware of it, right? If he still didn't know, she should hang him on the city wall and whip him every day. After washing up, the Empress wasn't in the mood to go out. Standing in front of the window, she could see a tall mountain in the distance, which should be a good place to bury people. Those so-called experts in Tianjing Basin should be satisfied to be buried there. After standing in front of the window for a long time, the Empress turned to the two of them and said, "Play cards with me." "I'll go get it." "Sister Hong Wuan, you play." Qing Yuan rolled her eyes and scurried out of the room. They weren't Principal Ren and didn't dare to win when playing cards with the Empress. Even if they won, they didn't dare to stick a note. It was better to watch from the side. The Empress played from morning to afternoon and plastered Hong Wuan like a mummy. Finally, she sat on the bed contentedly. Not long after, the Empress's eyes lit up. In a flash, she disappeared from the room and reappeared on the roof. He looked around and saw 5 people standing on the surrounding rooftops. There were men and women, young and old. There was a silver-haired old man in a green robe, a beautiful middle-aged woman, and a dwarf who was only half the size of an ordinary person. The 5 of them just stood there without making any movements, but they had their own imposing manner. 5 spirit will experts. That's less than what I expected. I've waited for so long in vain. The Empress's cold voice could be heard clearly within a radius of a kilometer. Azure Cloud Sword Tong Kai. Naturally, it was the old village chief that Rinpochen had met before. At this moment, he no longer had the image of an old hooligan. With a long sword on his back, a sharp sword aura surrounded his entire body, making him look like a heaven-piercing sword. Full Star Pavilion's Shan Ro. The one who spoke was the beautiful middle-aged woman. Her eyes were like water as she smiled at the Empress. Unaffiliated person Lu Xiangdong. The one who spoke was the unusually small dwarf. Unaffiliated person Chang Tian. It was an old man in his 60s or 70s who held a paper umbrella in his hand. North Alliance's Tai Feng. This was a middle-aged man with a broad build. The 5 of them bowed to the Empress. This was a show of respect for the strong. Only those who had reached their level would know how powerful the woman in front of them was. Your Majesty, please forgive us for not being able to welcome you earlier. We arrived first, and the other friends are still behind. We will definitely satisfy your Majesty, Qing Yun's sword said in a clear voice. North Alliance. I will kill you first. The Empress ignored Qing Yun's sword's words and muttered the words, North Alliance. Then, she spoke to Tai Feng. North Alliance, Wangbei City. She had heard of this place because all of them, including Longzhou City, were under the influence of the North Alliance. The name Wangbei was enough to explain everything. Tai Feng wasn't angry or afraid. He laughed and said, It's my honor to be remembered by your Majesty. Before coming here, I have already made arrangements for my funeral. My heart and soul are all focused on this battle. How much longer do you need to prepare? The Empress looked at Qing Yun's sword. It seemed like he had more authority among them. We will arrive tomorrow night. The day after tomorrow will be fine, Qing Yun's sword replied honestly. Since the Empress was waiting for them here, it had already explained everything. There was no need for him to hide anything. The day after tomorrow, I will wait for all of you at Mount Wu and see what you are capable of, the Empress said faintly. Then, she disappeared from the roof and reappeared in a room. The 5 of them also disappeared from the roof. However, the streets were already in chaos. After all, they had spoken loudly just now and didn't intend to hide anything. No one knew the names of Qing Yun's sword, Chang Tian, and Lu Xiangdong. However, the words, North Alliance's Tai Feng, and, Her Majesty, were like a sledgehammer pounding on everyone's chest. The leader of the North Alliance, Tai Feng, and the Empress of Dayo were actually in Wu City. Furthermore, they were going to fight. This was a huge matter. In everyone's hearts, this was a battle. It was hard for ordinary people to imagine that the Empress could actually gather all the experts in Tianjing Basin just for one battle. Ordinary people were shocked when they heard the voice on the roof, but the innkeeper's legs were trembling. He had heard that cold voice before. After all, no one would easily forget such a beautiful lady. Thinking about the fact that there was such a deity living in the inn while he was completely ignorant, he had the thought of abandoning the inn and running back to his hometown to escape. That night, he packed up and ran away, preparing to return in a few days. After all, the Aboriginal Empress didn't have a good image in the hearts of the remnant citizens. The result of this incident was that the Empress enjoyed the entire inn for a day and 2 nights. Other than the 3 of them, almost all the mice had run away. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Empress got up and washed up. She sat in front of the table and said faintly, help me dress up." Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan helped the Empress dress up for an hour. After the Empress was satisfied with her reflection in the mirror, she stood up and put on a bright red coat. After going out, she ran to a faraway place to eat breakfast. The innkeeper and chefs had all run away, and even the shops on the street were closed. The Empress had no choice but to run to a faraway place. After finishing breakfast, the Empress strolled in the city as if nothing had happened. She seemed to be strolling leisurely, but every step she took covered a distance of several meters. It was as if the ground had shortened under her feet. After leaving the city, every step she took covered a distance of more than 10 meters. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan had to use all their strength to barely keep up with the Empress's speed. At the same time, with every step she took, an imposing aura brewed and rose from her body. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, the imposing aura from her body was already as heavy as the peak of a mountain. It was so heavy that it was difficult to reach. They could only look up and feel their own insignificance. Thousands of people stopped at the foot of Dark Mountain. When they sensed the mountain-like pressure coming from the woman in red, who was approaching them from afar, they all retreated to the sides like flowing water. Fear filled their eyes. These people were either the disciples of the various powers or the guards of the three major powers. The Empress acted as if she didn't see these people and continued to walk forward. The people who were either standing or sitting on the mountainside also stood up and looked down the mountain. As the Empress got closer and closer, everyone subconsciously made way for her to pass through. Renbaqian saw this scene from the crowd and repeated a sentence in his heart: "It's worth it to have such prestige in one's life." The Empress suddenly stopped in her tracks, turned her head, and looked at Renbaqian, who was in the crowd. Renbaqian smiled and gave her a thumbs up before quickly retracting it and lowering his head slightly. The Empress was happy to see him, but she said coldly, "What are you doing here?" Everyone's head turned in Renbaqian's direction. Renbaqian felt like vomiting blood. Chapter 459. Renbaqian had made many assumptions about the beginning and process of this battle. In his mind, the story should start like this: the Empress, dressed in red, stood alone on the peak of the mountain, looked down at the crowd, and said, "All of you can come at me together." Then, the Empress would fight the crowd alone. When the crowd was no match for her, they would form a formation and he would throw dozens of fortified smoke grenades, causing the crowd to flee. He would make a great contribution and receive a kiss from the Empress. Or, in a crisis, he would bring the Empress back to Earth to recuperate for a few days. When he returned, he would see Shiwanya's face. In short, the beginning and ending of the story should be like this. However, the beginning of the story was completely different from what Renbaqian had imagined. He worked hard to infiltrate the enemy's camp, and the Empress sold him out with just one sentence. Renbaqian looked around. At present, no one was sure who the Empress was talking to, but many people were already looking at him. If he shouted, "Your Majesty, it's great to see you. I miss you so much," would they beat him up? Would the Empress be able to save him in time? Renbaqian felt that it was better to be more careful. Renbaqian sneered and said, You didn't expect this, did you? You didn't expect to see me here, did you?" When everyone heard this, they realized that Yi Yunxian had met Qi Zixiao before and had a feud. In that case, Yi Yunxian was much more powerful than they had imagined. What kind of person was able to become enemies with Qi Zixiao and survive? He definitely wasn't just an envoy from the Yun nation. Everyone looked at Renbaqian in a different light. Renbaqian stepped forward, and everyone made way for him, waiting to see the confrontation between him and the Empress. The Empress didn't expect Renbaqian to reply so coldly. She felt a pain in her heart, raised her eyebrows, and looked at him coldly. Renbaqian was only a few dozen meters away from the Empress. As he passed through the crowd, he was on tenterhooks. When he stood in front of the crowd, he immediately relaxed and put on a warm smile. You didn't expect me to wait for you here, right? I missed you so much. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, and then a pounce. Then, the Empress dodged, gave him a princess hug, and threw him to the ground. Everyone around them was stunned. What was going on? His tone just now gave everyone the impression that the two of them knew each other, and that there was a deep hatred between them. However, in the blink of an eye, it was true that the two of them had gotten to know each other, but their deep hatred had turned into affection. The change in style was too fast, so fast that no one could react. Who are you? Someone immediately reacted and shouted. This person was definitely not someone from the Yun nation. It was impossible for the people of the Yun nation to be on Qi Zixiao's side. Ren Baqin turned his head and looked around. Everyone was looking at him, and many of them looked angry at being deceived. Although he hadn't been in the mood to make friends with these people, he had gotten to know quite a few people. There were people from the Golden Ring House, experts from the Northern Alliance, people from the Southern Metropolis, and people from other sections. At this moment, all of them were looking at him with confusion and anger. Sorry, I'm a police officer. Ren Baqin looked at the crowd. He didn't have a bad impression of many people here. Before he came into contact with it, the number of people who died was just a number. He never cared about such numbers, didn't care, and didn't think too much about it. But after coming into contact with them, each and every one of them had flesh and blood in his mind. He sighed and continued, You are bandits, I am an official, we are not the same people. But to be honest, all you want is to walk out of here. I came here for this purpose. You don't have to be so anxious. However, it was already too late to say this. All the experts in Tianjing Basin were here, and he couldn't possibly make them retreat obediently just by saying a few words. Therefore, he didn't want to waste his breath. Cut the crap. You're obviously not from the ancient race, yet you're Qi Zixiao's dog. That's a disgrace to our ancestors. Someone scolded from below, followed by a wave of curses. Seeing this, the Water Empress's gaze turned even colder. Her killing intent intensified as she memorized every single person who spoke up. He could scold them, but others couldn't. Whoever cursed, he would kill. I know who he is. Someone else said. You're the gigolo that Qi Zixiao found, right? Ren Baqin touched his face. His reputation had spread all the way here. Handsome is only on the surface. After interacting with me for a long time, you will realize that I'm more beautiful and handsome inside. Ren Baqin sighed. Pfft, who said you were handsome? Don't you have any shame? Are you doubting Her Majesty's judgment? Ren Baqin retorted. Pfft. 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 Everyone's anger and contempt were unmistakable. Everyone from the Golden Ring residence frowned and looked at their chief. Zhang Chongkong stroked his beard with a complicated look in his eyes. He didn't expect that he would personally send a spy to the hidden village. He was filled with regret, anger, and some other thoughts. He didn't know what exactly was going on in his mind. In any case, no one dared to spit in front of the two of them. After all, the Empress was standing beside Ren Baqin. Even if they came with the mentality of death, they couldn't ignore the Empress's status and strength. All of you, shut up. Qing Yun's sword frowned as he looked at the farce below. We've made a fool of ourselves in front of your majesty, Qing Yun's sword said. He then looked at Ren Baqin and said coldly, I really didn't expect this. I didn't expect it either. Ren Baqin replied. He really didn't expect to be among these people. I don't like people standing higher than me. The Empress said coldly. When Ren Baqin came over just now, the momentum that she had accumulated was interrupted and began to fall. As she took another step, her momentum rose again. The Empress walked all the way to a higher position than everyone else before looking down. "Your Majesty, be careful," Renbochin said behind the Empress. "Retreat to the back. I want to see what these people have up their sleeves," the Empress said coldly. There were more people than she had expected. She didn't expect so many people to come. The scene was huge, and there were a lot of people. Their target was her. This kind of scene made her even more eager to fight. 18 spirit will experts, not bad. These experts among the remnant citizens were also not bad. Tens of millions of people, all the experts among the remnant citizens were here, looking up at the Empress from below. This made the blood in the Empress's body boil, and there was a rumbling sound that sounded like a flood crashing into a river. In addition to her identity as the Empress, she was also a practitioner and the 5th most powerful expert in the world. The Aboriginal emperors were never the kind of emperors who didn't live in dangerous situations. Otherwise, why would the first emperor abandon everything and bring the experts into the mountains without any news of them? Why would the second emperor go out alone, return with serious injuries, and then disappear again? Being the Empress was a responsibility and identity, but not everything. The rumbling sound from the Empress's body caused the expressions of many spirit will experts to change. The blood in her body was agitated and emitted a sound like a torrent. To what extent had she cultivated her blood and qi? Renbochin stood behind the Empress and said in a different tone, "Your Majesty, why don't you let me play a song to strengthen your Majesty's prestige?" The Empress, who was about to erupt like a volcano, suddenly stopped. An ominous feeling arose in her heart. Renbochin turned around and took out the arrow with a face full of smiles. With such a big scene and so many listeners, this was his chance to perform. The Empress stood there alone, facing hundreds of experts. How could an ordinary person compare to such a mighty aura? How could an ordinary person be worthy of her? Chapter 460. At this moment, the Empress even had the thought of smacking Renbochin to death. According to her expectations, her aura should be at its peak at this moment. Regardless of whether it was her body or her mind, she should be in the best condition. However, she was interrupted twice by Renbochin. As a result, she was always a little short of perfect condition. However, Renbochin knew nothing about this mysterious matter and was completely oblivious to it. He cheerfully found a place to sit down with the arrow in his hand and held the bow in his left hand. This was what he had learned from his grandfather. His grandfather was left-handed, and although he wasn't, he was used to this posture when playing the arrow. Renbochin sat there and pulled the bow twice to get a feel. Then, the strange notes of pomp and circumstance, and the moans of the arrow flowed out from his hands. The Empress immediately shivered. She was originally prepared to stand in place and let them make the first move, but now, she completely gave up on this idea. She silently turned into a red shadow and pounced on one of the 18 spirit will experts below. Her extreme speed made her figure a red line in the eyes of many. Tai Feng from the North Alliance. The Empress said that she would kill him first, so she would definitely kill him first. Good timing. Tai Feng laughed heartily as a long saber appeared in his hand. The saber emitted a blazing heat that caused a heat current in the air. Clang! The Empress's body trembled slightly, but Tai Feng was sent flying like a cannonball. Tai Feng was good at charging and breaking through enemy lines. His strength wasn't weak among the spirit will experts, but he wasn't a match for the Empress in terms of strength. Umbrella! Chang Tian pointed from afar, and a paper umbrella that was about 30 meters long appeared in the air. Open! Chang Tian shouted again, and the giant umbrella in the air suddenly opened, covering a radius of about 30 meters. The Empress suddenly felt the sky darken as if the umbrella had covered half of it. Fall! Countless steel needles fell from the umbrella like a rainstorm. Those with good eyesight would be able to see that these weren't steel needles, but the ribs of the umbrella. Qing Yun's sword pointed with his finger, and the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang. Dozens of sword gleams scattered in the air. A ribbon appeared in Shan Ro's hand. The front end of the ribbon, which was originally more than a meter long, kept extending forward as if it were alive. At the same time, the ribbon grew from 1 meter long to more than 10 meters long. Furthermore, it continued to extend forward and wrap around the Empress's feet. On the other hand, Lulu Dong's body transformed into a black shadow and moved in the mountains. His short stature was like that of an ape, and he reached the top of the Empress's head in no time. These 4 people were the fastest to react. After all, when the Empress said those words, they didn't feel that she was trying to intimidate them. With her status and strength, even though her words weren't the law, what she said was definitely what she was thinking. The Empress raised her hand and threw a punch at Lu Xiangdong, forcing him to retreat. Her fist didn't feel like it had made contact with a solid object. It was as if the dwarf flew along with the wind generated by her fist, landed somewhere not far away, and slid along the ground toward the Empress. After a few of them made their moves, the other spirit wool experts followed suit. Someone was holding a fishing rod. Dozens of thin lines that were hard to detect shot out from the fishing rod and wrapped around the Empress. A chessboard appeared in someone's hand. With a slap of his palm on the chessboard, countless chess pieces shot toward the Empress. However, when the chess pieces were in the air, they turned into ferocious beasts. Out of the 18 people, 8 of them had condensed their heaven-grade weapons. Even though the other 10 were holding weapons that they were comfortable with, their speed and strength still couldn't be compared to that of an earth-will expert. With 18 people attacking at the same time, the Empress seemed to be surrounded by all kinds of lights. Everyone could only hear the sounds of collisions in the light circle and couldn't see anything. Although it took a long time to describe, from the moment the Empress made her move to the moment everyone counterattacked, everything actually happened in a split second. Renbaqian had just played 8 short notes when a trembling moan drilled into everyone's mind. A series of moans rang out. That could be called 1,000 poses and 100 enchanting, that could be called 100 soul-stirring, that could shake one's heart and soul. Everyone's heart suddenly trembled. The Empress's sword fingers, which were shaped like a sword, slashed toward Lulu Dong, missed. With a shake of the fishing rod in the old man's hand, dozens of thin lines pierced the ground around the Empress with a piercing sound. The beasts formed by dozens of chess pieces had originally formed a flawless encirclement. However, 2 of the beasts suddenly slowed down and revealed a few flaws. The others were more or less affected by this series of moans. All of them wanted to turn their heads to look, but they resisted the urge. Their moves unconsciously slowed down by a little, and there were loopholes in their coordination with each other. When experts exchanged blows, there was a fine line of difference, let alone an expert like the Empress. She threw a few punches in succession at the spirit wool expert who was holding the chessboard. After exchanging blows with him, she borrowed the momentum to pounce toward Qing Yun's sword. While in the air, purplish red lines began to appear on the surface of her body. Her aura became stronger, and she pounced down with the force of the sky falling. Qing Yun's sword felt the Empress firmly locking onto him. A huge force enveloped him as if he was facing an ancient giant beast, causing a great fear to rise in his heart. She's indeed the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Qing Yun's sword roared in his heart. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood, breaking the pressure that the Empress had enveloped him. Then, he used 2 of his fingers to form a sword and slowly drew it in the air. Following his fingers, Qing Yun's sword, who was floating 1 meter above his head, turned into countless rays of light that surrounded the Empress as if they wanted to mince her into pieces. "Get lost," the Empress shouted. Her hands flicked around her body, producing a clanging sound. Clang! It sounded like 2 swords colliding. Even though these rays of light couldn't mince her into pieces, she didn't want her clothes to be destroyed. The Empress turned half a circle in the air and stomped down. Qin Yun's sword quickly drew a sword with his fingers, and a long sword appeared in front of him. The Empress stepped on the sword, and it turned into countless rays of light that flew in all directions. Qin Yun's sword also spat out a mouthful of blood, and his feet sank 3 meters into the ground. When the Empress borrowed the momentum to soar into the air and pounced again, a paper umbrella appeared between her and Qin Yun's sword. Then, everyone surrounded the Empress once again. However, at this time, there was always a sound that kept pouring into everyone's mind. The sound was like a crying beauty moaning under the bed. It wouldn't have been a big deal if that was the case, but this sound was strange and had never been heard before. It made people restless and unconsciously affected. The 5 senses of a practitioner were sharper than those of an ordinary person, let alone a spirit will expert. Let alone a spirit will expert who specialized in cultivating the spirit. Their control over their bodies was much weaker than the Empress's, and their spirits were greatly affected when they were stimulated. Shut up! A spirit will expert shouted angrily in Renbachian's direction. This damn sound was too disturbing. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a formidable enemy, he would have turned around and chopped that guy up. Renbachian closed his mouth tightly and nodded with an aggrieved expression. Can't I just keep my mouth shut? Then, he continued to play his arrow with satisfaction. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan were worriedly looking at the battle below, but they couldn't see anything clearly. They couldn't help but look at Renbachian as the sound of the arrow made them clench their teeth and want to slap the person in front of them to the ground. As for the many earth will experts below, they couldn't help but plug their ears when they heard the sound of the arrow. It was so stimulating that it made their hearts beat faster and faster, making them want to kill someone. Bang! A figure flew out of the battle. It was a woman holding a pair of scissors. She spat out several mouthfuls of blood in the air, and the sound of her bones breaking could be heard. She had been disturbed by the sound of Renbachian's arrow just now, and a flaw appeared between her 2 moves. The Empress seized this opportunity to break her move and punch her body a dozen times in a row, breaking her bones. If the Empress hadn't said that she would kill Tai Feng first and held back a little bit, she would have been dead by now. Even so, it would be difficult to recover without a few years of recuperation, and there was no way for her to advance further. I'm here. Don't forget me, Your Majesty. Tai Yan, who had been punched down the mountain by the Empress just now, jumped up and shouted. Everyone immediately understood. Lu Xiangdong, Chang Tian, and Shan Ro moved closer to Tai Yan, ready to protect him at any time. Since Qi Zixiao had said so, she would only seriously injure him before killing him and not kill anyone else. This was the shackles that Qi Zixiao had placed on herself. Then, a few more sounds of the arrow reached everyone's ears, causing their hearts to skip a beat. If it wasn't for Qi Zixiao's ferocity, everyone would have smacked that fellow to death. Chapter 461. When that familiar tune sounded again, the veins on everyone's forehead bulged. It would have been fine if it was just unpleasant to listen to, but the sound of the zither always made everyone quiver, and their movements inevitably became flawed. Stop her, I'll go. A man shouted, turned around, and pounced up the mountain. The others immediately filled the gap left by him. The Empress's eyes flashed coldly. You're courting death. Beating up her own people in front of her. If this wasn't courting death, then what was? The purplish red lines on her face deepened. Completely ignoring the swords and sabers around her, she turned into a ray of red light and charged at the man. Good chance. The man in front of the Empress was delighted. He thrust his sword at the Empress with an indomitable momentum. The Empress could either dodge or face him head-on. If she dodged, she naturally wouldn't be able to catch up. If she faced him head-on, as long as he could injure her, the chances of winning this battle would be greatly increased. Trying to escape. Shan-Ro sneered. The ribbon in her hand was like a snake, coiling around the Empress's feet. Eat my rod first. A tall man leaped into the air and pointed the long rod in his hand at the Empress like a poisonous dragon. Get lost. The Empress roared. Her hand brushed past the incoming longsword, and a series of metallic clanging sounds rang out. She flicked her fingers 17 times, and every flick of her hand carried a tremendous force that traveled along the blade of the sword and into the opponent's hand, causing the longsword to be forcefully deflected. Then, she turned her palm to face the sky, and her jade-white palm forcibly blocked the long rod that was in the air like a poisonous dragon. However, a bright flash of a saber quietly slashed across the Empress's back, causing a stream of blood to spurt out of her body. The blood quickly turned into gas as soon as it splashed into the air. This was caused by the burning of the Empress's essence blood. Once it left her body, she could no longer control it and directly vaporized. The Empress ignored the injury on her back. In a flash, she appeared outside the encirclement. Her toes tapped lightly on the ground twice, and she caught up with the man who was 3 meters away from him. Be careful. Everyone was shocked. The reason wasn't that the Empress broke through the encirclement so easily. They didn't even manage to injure her. It was because there was a ribbon wrapped around her feet, and there was a person on the other end of the ribbon. Shan-Ro was actually dragged out by the Empress. Let me help you. A few of them shouted one after another. They grabbed the ribbon that was connected to Shan-Ro and the Empress while the rest of them pounced toward the Empress. The Empress saw that the person in front of her was only 3 meters away. Just one more step and she would be able to catch him. At this moment, she felt a strong force coming from beneath her feet, causing her to pause. One end of the ribbon was tied to the Empress, while the other end was held in the hands of 5 or 6 people. It was like a tug-of-war. However, there were still 10 figures pouncing toward the Empress. The Empress was furious. The wrinkles on her face became darker, and her skin started to turn red. She stomped on the ground, and a force that was much greater than before was transmitted through the ribbon. Everyone was caught unprepared, and one by one, they lost their balance and were dragged away. The rubble under the Empress's feet was sent flying. When she scurried away, there was only a huge pit left in her original position. Using this momentum, she finally caught up with the person in front of her. That person turned over and threw out dozens of bone needles, followed by 6 iron awls that were as thick as fingers. The short spear in his hand suddenly turned into a long spear. He shouted, "Break!" Like a flood dragon, the spear pierced through the air and headed toward the Empress. The Empress placed her hands in front of her and allowed the dozens of bone needles to hit her body. She circulated her blood essence, and the bone needles that had just pierced through her skin turned into powder. 6 iron needles landed in the Empress's hands in a flash. She turned her hand and threw them at the people chasing behind her. Everyone was shocked and prepared to dodge. With the strength of the Empress and these specially made iron awls, if they hit a person's body, it would create a bull-sized hole. Then, they saw that the nearest iron awl was 3 meters away from them, and it flew past them just like that. Suddenly, the Empress's arm seemed to have no bones as it wrapped around the opponent's long spear. With a twist and a shake, that person immediately lost his grip on the spear handle, and the spear flew straight into the air. At a speed that was difficult for everyone to see, the Empress pointed 7 times in a row at the chest of that person. What kind of finger is this? That person was immediately motionless like a clay puppet after being pointed by the Empress. He muttered to himself. "You are already dead." The Empress didn't even look at him. However, before he died, there was one more person that had to be killed first. She turned around and pounced behind her, but a stone under her feet flew toward Renbochin. The sound of Renbochin's error not only upset the others, but also made her feel anxious. This stone went straight for the arrow in Renbachian's hand. The strength of the stone was extremely good, and it was just enough to smash the arrow. However, just as the Empress turned around and pounced toward the crowd, the stone hit Renbachian's head, who was completely immersed in the music. Renbachian only felt his vision go black, and he fell backward. "Aw!" Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan exclaimed softly. They didn't expect the Empress to actually kick a stone over and knock Principal Ren out. However, the two of them heaved a sigh of relief. If the Empress didn't make a move, the two of them wouldn't be able to hold it in any longer. Lin Chaola was originally in a daze beside Renbachian. Seeing that Renbachian was lying down, she rested her head on his stomach and adjusted to a comfortable sleeping position. When Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan turned around and saw that one of them had fainted and the other was looking for a comfortable sleeping position, they were almost scared to death. The Empress was fighting in front of them. What was Lin Chaola doing? The Empress turned around and faced the crowd that was surrounding her. She punched the heads of the beasts that pounced at her. With a pop sound, the beasts dissipated like smoke. Every time a beast was defeated, a crack would appear on the chessboard in the hands of the person holding the chessboard. At this point in time, the cracks on the chessboard were already densely packed. Out of the dozens of beasts that were created previously, only about 10 were left on the periphery. After defeating a few beasts, the Empress leaped up and pounced toward Tai Feng, who was behind her. Her 5 fingers clawed at his head. "Stop her!" Shan Ro hurriedly shouted. A paper umbrella appeared just in time between the Empress and Tai Feng. It was Chang Tian's doing. When the paper umbrella was opened, it blocked the Empress's claw, but a hole was gouged out. Following which, he closed the paper umbrella and used it like a spear or a sword. The Empress didn't pay any attention to him. She blocked the paper umbrella with one hand and continued to grab Tai Feng with the other. Qin Yun's sword transformed into a ray of light and slashed at the Empress's neck. The ray of light that injured the Empress previously appeared again. "All of you, get lost!" The Empress shouted. The word "get lost" seemed to have materialized in her mouth. A huge sound wave surged in all directions. It was like the roar of an ancient beast, causing everyone's heart to skip a beat. The redness on the surface of the Empress's skin became more vivid and the color of the veins became darker. The veins had completely turned purple. Everyone felt as if the purple veins were about to materialize and detach from the Empress's body. The Empress's eyes began to turn red. A monstrous, overbearing, ferocious, and sinister aura emanated from her body. Everyone felt as if they weren't facing a person at this moment. It was no longer that heroic lady in red, but an ancient beast that had been resurrected in front of them. Chapter 462. Die. The Empress's eyes turned red. She sped up and turned into a shadow in front of everyone's eyes. Tai Feng faced the incoming Empress with a crazed look in his eyes. His aura skyrocketed as he shouted, "Saber domain." He stabbed the saber in his hand into the ground. The next second, numerous saber tips emerged from the ground, forming an airtight saber domain with him as the center. However, the Empress only stepped on the saber tips. Her shoes had already been pierced, so she used the tip of her foot to tap on the saber tips as if she was dancing on them. As the Empress's figure streaked across the air, the sabers behind her shattered into pieces and turned into light spots that dissipated in the air. Everyone could see that it was a perfectly straight path amidst countless steel blades. Slash! Tai Feng's body straightened and he swung the saber in his hand from the ground. The saber was shrouded in a red glow that was several meters long and collided with the red glow of the Empress. At the same time, countless saber tips shot out from the ground and formed a saber dragon that swallowed the Empress. Dust and dirt flew everywhere, and a series of metallic clangs resounded in everyone's ears. When the dust settled, the two of them could be seen standing in the middle of the field. The Empress was holding a heart in her hand. Fresh blood was splattered on her cheeks, matching the purple veins on her face. Typhon clutched his chest with one hand and held the broken saber in the other. His body swayed a little before he fell to the ground. He still had a crazy look in his eyes. "I finally hurt you." Traces of blood flowed out from the Empress's abdomen. In the blink of an eye, the wound stopped bleeding. The Empress controlled her body to stop the bleeding, but the wound didn't heal. As Typhon fell, the flesh on the chest of the man who had fallen to the ground suddenly burst open. In the blink of an eye, only his skeleton was left. Just like the Empress said, he was already dead. Two dead, one seriously injured. The Empress had 2 saber wounds. "Chief! Warlord!" Many Earthwill experts below shouted when they saw Typhon fall. The spectators all felt a tinge of sadness in their hearts. Although Tai Feng's previous 2 moves had activated all of his blood, qi, and divine soul, he wouldn't be able to live for long even if Qi Zixiao didn't kill him. However, from those 2 moves, they could tell that he was only a step away from condensing a divine weapon. Even if he didn't activate his qi, blood, and soul, he could still use it. However, he knew that he would definitely die, so he held the thought of biting Qi Zixiao even if he had to die, so he activated his qi, blood, and soul to increase his strength. That was how he managed to injure Qi Zixiao in a head-on collision. However, everyone quickly extinguished this trace of sadness. After all, everyone who had come here was prepared to die. The Empress was injured, and her eyes were red. The corners of her eyes slanted upwards, giving off a murderous vibe. She was incomparably ferocious. As she turned around, her fine black hair fluttered in the wind as she charged towards the person closest to her. Stall for time. There's a time limit to her current state. Qing Yun's sword shouted from afar. Qi Zixiao's current state had indeed greatly improved her strength. Compared to the time when there were no wrinkles on her face, she was at least several times stronger. However, this kind of cultivation method could not be maintained for long. Set the formation. Kill the people up there. Qing Yun's sword could see Ren Baqian's position in Ren Baqian's heart from how the Empress wanted to kill that spirit will expert even after taking a blow from him. Although this was somewhat despicable and didn't meet his lifelong goals, this was a matter of life and death. All the experts in Tianjing Basin were already here. With hundreds of people surrounding one person, he couldn't care less about anything else. As Qing Yun's sword spoke, his hands didn't slow down at all. His sword floated around the Empress. 1 second, it was in front of her, and the next moment, it appeared behind her. The trajectory of a normal sword was linear. After all, a sword couldn't move instantaneously. Regardless of whether it was a straight line or an arc, it had to be linear. However, under his control, this sword existed between points and lacked the line in the middle. "You're courting death." As the Empress deflected the attacks from the people around her, she took 2 steps forward and slammed her shoulder into Chang Tian's chest, causing him to spit out blood and fly backward. She then pounced towards Qing Yun's sword. At this time, 2 people had already split up to pounce on Ren Baqian and the others. One more person. That little girl is very powerful. Qing Yun's sword hurriedly reminded. However, out of the 18 spirit will experts, 3 were already dead. Another 3 were sent to attack Ren Baqian and the others. The remaining people were facing the Empress, who was in full combat mode, and the pressure was even greater. Lin Chaola, who was in a daze, suddenly opened her eyes. Her pupils turned vertical and emitted a dangerous glint. She turned into a gust of wind and disappeared. The numerous earth will experts below also formed a formation, forming an inner and outer circle that encompassed everyone in the field. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan stood at the side anxiously, but they couldn't help and could only stomp their feet. Ren Baqian finally woke up after a short period of unconsciousness. His eyes were filled with confusion. Who am I? Where am I? Who hit me? There was a round bump on his forehead that was bright red, making him look like a unicorn. After a long time, he came back to his senses and asked, "Who hit me just now?" Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan turned to look at him before turning back again. Do you want me to tell you that it was Her Majesty? Although it was indeed Her Majesty, we won't tell you. Ren Baqian touched his forehead, grimaced in pain, and cursed, "Damn it! Bastard!" Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan looked at him again before turning back again. They were wondering if they should tell Her Majesty about how Principal Ren had cursed them. Both of them were very loyal. Ren Baqian cursed and looked up at the field. He saw the Empress fighting with more than 10 people. From time to time, someone would spit out blood and fly away, but they would force themselves to join the fight. In less than 2 minutes, the Empress turned over and slapped the top of someone's head, causing his entire head to be smashed into his chest. There were 11 people left in the field. On the other hand, Lin Qiaola was fighting with the 3 of them. The 3 of them had more or less scratches on their bodies. Lin Qiaola's abdomen, which was exposed between her tube top and short skirt, had a hole pierced through it. Lin Qiaola, who always gave people the impression that she was always sleepy and harmless, finally bared her fangs at this moment. Her face was full of murderous intent as she locked onto the 3 people and treated them as her prey. Surrounding them were the 2 sets of formations that they had been practicing earlier, and they were encircling everyone, including himself. Bang! 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 Another 3 dull sounds of bodies colliding with each other were heard. Another spirit will expert died under the Empress's fists. At the same time, Shan Ro was pulled to the front by a ribbon and kicked in the chest. Her entire chest caved in, and she kept spitting out blood in the air. Another 3-inch long wound appeared on the Empress's leg, and blood flowed continuously. At this moment, the Empress's eyes had turned completely red, and the veins on her body seemed to have solidified. Her aura was even stronger than before she was injured. This made everyone tremble in fear. After all, the current Qi Zixiao didn't feel like a human at all, but more like a ferocious beast that had awakened from ancient times. Even in the face of so many spirit will experts, she was still able to suppress them. Since the start of the battle, at least 3 people had died and 2 were seriously injured. It was unknown whether Shan Ro could survive. Excluding the other 3, there were still 10 people in the field. The most important thing was that they didn't know how long she could continue in this state. Life and death battles were extremely fierce, and life and death could be decided in an instant. If she continued in this state for another 15 minutes, there would be no one left alive. The more people died, the less people were left. The greater the pressure, the faster the collapse. Everyone understood this principle. Qin Yun's sword understood what everyone was thinking. Even he thought, it's hard to match a human's strength. How can a human be so strong? How strong are those who are stronger than her? This kind of thinking. However, at this moment, he couldn't allow this kind of emotion to grow in everyone. He shouted, "She can't hold on in this state for long. Heavenly Star Formation, gather." Following his shout, the inner formation started to change and shrink in size. He was prepared to use the formation to exhaust the Empress's strength. Ren Baqian looked at the Empress worriedly. He didn't know how long she could hold on. After all, he didn't understand the situation of these people. He was only a manual expert. Then, he silently opened the box that Lin Qiaola had been holding, revealing dozens of fortified smoke grenades inside. Chapter 463. Previously, Qing Yun's sword divided the Earth Will experts into two groups, and one of them formed the Heavenly Stars formation. This formation was divided into 5 parts, namely the Qi, Ji, Hui, Shan, and Exterminate sections. Each section had 36 people, and each section was an individual formation. In other words, each section could be used to form a separate formation against the enemy, and the 5 sections combined to form a large formation. Renbaqian wasn't in the formation and wasn't very clear about the specifics. According to what he heard, this formation was specially designed to trap people. Even if Qing Yun's sword was trapped in the formation, it would be difficult for him to escape. The moon plate formation was divided into 6 sections, and each section could launch an attack equivalent to the strength of a Spirit Will expert. This formation was equivalent to having 6 more Spirit Will experts. When the 6 sections combined, they could launch an attack that was far superior to that of a Spirit Will expert. However, this formation was only good at long-range attacks. If one was forced into the formation, it would automatically become chaotic. If 6 people were forced into the 6 sections at the same time, the formation would naturally collapse. These 2 formations were specially prepared by Qing Yun's sword for the Empress. Following Qing Yun's sword's orders, the people in the Heavenly Stars formation divided into 5 sections and surrounded the crowd. Each section had 36 people, and as the crowd closed in, the gap between the 2 sections became smaller and smaller until the 5 sections were connected together to form a large formation. Renbaqian looked back and saw that one of the sections was right behind him. The 36 people were constantly changing positions, and Renbaqian even saw a few familiar faces among them. Everyone from the Golden Ring residence fixed their eyes on him. Renbaqian was sent to the hidden village by the people from the Golden Ring residence, so the Golden Ring residence was inextricably involved. At this moment, no one cared about this matter in the midst of a great battle. After this battle, someone would definitely bring it up, and the Golden Ring residence would have to give everyone an explanation. The best explanation was to kill Renbaqian. Although the Heavenly Stars formation was used to trap people, it could also kill people, just that it wasn't as powerful as the moon plate formation. If Renbaqian stood in place and didn't move, he would be sucked into the formation, killed, or trapped inside when the 5 sections combined. However, those Spirit Will experts were fighting. Even though they were controlling their strength and making it more concentrated, every punch and sword strike would create a large pit or deep ravine in the ground. If Renbaqian were to get caught up in the fight, he was afraid that the aftermath of the fight would cause him to die without a burial place even without the help of others. If he moved, the top would be blocked, and he could only retreat downward, which would still result in death. Fortunately, I made some preparations beforehand. Renbaqian heaved a sigh of relief. He took out a smoke grenade from the box and tossed it in his hand. After estimating the distance, he threw the smoke grenade along the side of the mountain. It landed right in front of everyone. Renbaqian was worried that it wasn't powerful enough, so he threw another one before looking up anxiously. Be careful of poison. When everyone saw the white smoke coming out of the strange-looking thing that Renbaqian had thrown over, they immediately held their breaths, and their formation was slightly disrupted. Then, an indescribable, unimaginable, and unbearable stench began to drift along with the smoke, drilling directly into people's noses. Everyone held their breath as they passed through the smoke. The moment they took a breath, they felt as if their heads had been smashed by a sledgehammer. A foul stench rushed into their nostrils, causing them to see stars. They even used their hands to choke their throats, making it difficult for them to breathe. Tears flowed down his cheeks uncontrollably. No one had ever thought that they would actually cry because of the stench. But it really happened. Everyone was surrounded by the stench. When they passed through the smoke, the stench had stuck to their bodies. Even now, the stench was still drifting in the air. Plop! A few people immediately fainted from suffocation under such a strong stench. Even if it was poison, the resistance of an earth-will expert wasn't low. Even with the sarin gas that Rinpoche had used before, an earth-will expert could hold on for a longer time and even escape. However, this stench that was beyond everyone's understanding went straight to their heads. It was as if a sledgehammer had been swung around and knocked on their heads. It was also as if someone had stuffed 20 years of old feces into their noses and mouths. Even these earth-will experts couldn't withstand the dual attributes of the spiritual and physical attributes. Poison, it's poison. Kill him and get the antidote. Wretch. Wretch. Someone started to vomit halfway through his sentence. Wretch. Wretch. Following his voice, everyone started to vomit one after another. As they vomited, they subconsciously ran toward the side where the air was fresher. Not everyone could crawl around in a pit of shit that had been sealed for decades. This was even more unbearable than death. However, wherever they ran, the stench would follow. The biggest characteristic of this stench was its adhesiveness. Although it still carried a stench that made people want to vomit, the fresh air made everyone feel better. At least, they could barely breathe, but it felt like they were pouring feces into their mouths with every breath. It wasn't ordinary feces, but concentrated and enhanced feces. There were still a few people who were stronger. They forcibly resisted the urge to vomit and ran toward Rinpoche. They had to make this bastard give them the antidote. Run. Rinpoche saw that the fortified smoke grenades couldn't stop them and quickly ran down the mountain. However, apart from the spirit-will experts fighting, there was also a large formation. Where could they run to? He stuffed the box into Qing Yuan's hands, took out a smoke grenade, and threw it toward the earth-will experts who were forming a formation in the distance. Wretch! Wretch! A total of more than a dozen smoke grenades were thrown, and the two formations that were originally formed collapsed. A breeze blew past. Rinpoche's eyes widened, and his head almost fell to the ground. It was simply too smelly. It was an indescribable stench. It was as if 1,000 rubber tires were piled up and burning around him, suffocating him and making him unable to breathe. Even if he held his breath, this stench would go straight to his brain and make him burst into tears. Canned herring. Rinpoche felt that he would rather eat canned herring every day than smell this stench. How could man-made edible food compare to the prehistoric power of heaven and earth? There was no comparison at all. Wretch! Rinpoche's face turned green. He vomited as he ran, smelling the stench that came from all directions. Ah! This scream came from the spirit-will expert that Lin Chaola was fighting. Lin Chaola was lying on his back with one of her legs twisted into the shape of a fried dough twist. Her hands were tightly locked onto his arms, and her teeth were firmly biting into his neck. As the spirit-will expert struggled, a large piece of flesh was torn off by Lin Chaola. A breeze blew past, and Lin Chaola screamed like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She kicked the back of the spirit-will expert with one leg and jumped about 3 meters into the air. There's poison. Hold your breath. The other two spirit-will experts with claw marks on their faces smelled the stench and immediately blacked out. If Lin Chaola had seized the opportunity at this moment, it wouldn't have been a problem for her to kill at least one more person. However, at this moment, she was even more miserable than the other two. She kept screaming in the air as her tears flowed like a river. Her sense of smell was originally stronger than that of a human's, and this stench was several times more harmful to her. She almost fainted. After landing on the ground, she immediately turned into a gust of wind and looked around for a less smelly place. In the end, she directly collided with Rinpoche, causing him to tumble. Lin Chaola fell to the ground and couldn't stop wailing. Her sorrow flowed like a river. On the other side, the Empress's eyes were originally covered with a layer of blood, and even her pupils had shrunk to the size of a needle tip. Waves of ruthless and murderous thoughts filled her mind, trying to drown her last trace of clarity. However, a breeze blew past, and the Empress's pupils instantly dilated. Her body disappeared from the crowd like lightning. It was so smelly that her vision turned black. She had never smelled such a stench in her entire life. The extreme stench woke her up in an instant, but she would rather not wake up. It wasn't only her, but the others also didn't smell it. All of their faces turned green, and they held their breaths. They wanted to vomit but didn't dare to. Once they vomited, they would definitely inhale. The scene quieted down in an instant. The Empress landed beside Rinpochian and wanted to speak, but before she could speak, she covered her mouth first. At this moment, Rinpochian's face was also green. It was too smelly, and he was about to suffocate. He didn't expect the added ingredients to be so powerful. He gestured to the Empress with one hand and dragged Lin Chaola, who had fallen to the ground, with the other. The Empress pulled Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan along. In the next second, everyone disappeared from the scene. All that was left behind was a stench that made it hard for everyone to breathe. When the crowd outside saw that Qi Zixiao and the others had suddenly disappeared, they were surprised and dispersed to a distant place with better air circulation, maintaining their encirclement. They didn't believe that Qi Zixiao had disappeared just like that. However, the stench followed them like a maggot attached to a bone. No matter where they went, they could smell it. Wretch! After another half a day, everyone discovered a terrifying fact. Even bathing couldn't wash away the stench from their bodies. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.